Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The view was breathtaking, but so was the grip around my throat. I should have known better than to follow strangers off the trail, but hindsight is always 20/20 when you're fighting for your life. It had started as the perfect day for a hike in Yosemite. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and the trail was quieter than usual. I relished the solitude, the crunch of gravel under my boots, and the occasional chirp of a bird overhead. The world felt right. I'd been walking for about 2 hours when I came across a group of hikers gathered around a map. They were laughing and chatting, their voices carrying on the light breeze. As I approached, a tall guy with a neatly trimmed beard looked up and waved. "Hey there, you look like you know your way around. Mind helping us out?" I smiled, always happy to assist fellow hikers. "Sure, what do you need?" The bearded man introduced himself as Mike and gestured to his companions, 2 women and another man. They all seemed friendly enough, with easy smiles and relaxed postures. "We're trying to find this viewpoint," Mike said, pointing to a spot on the map. "It's supposed to be incredible, but it's not on the main trail. You wouldn't happen to know it, would you?" I peered at the map, frowning slightly. "I don't think I've been there before. Is it safe?" One of the women, Sarah, she'd said her name was, chimed in. "Oh, it's perfectly safe. We've been there before. It's just a bit tricky to find if you don't know where you're going." I hesitated, my eyes darting between their eager faces and the map. Something in my gut whispered caution, but I pushed it aside. After all, wasn't meeting new people and discovering hidden gems part of the joy of hiking? "You know what? I'd love to see it. Mind if I tag along?" Their faces lit up, and Mike clapped me on the shoulder. "Absolutely, the more the merrier. It's about an hour off the main trail, but trust me, it's worth it." We set off, leaving the well-worn path behind. At first, the conversation flowed easily. We swapped stories about our favorite hikes, compared gear, and marveled at the beauty of Yosemite. But as we ventured deeper into the wilderness, a subtle shift occurred. The laughter died down, replaced by hushed whispers I couldn't quite make out. Whenever I glanced back, I caught them exchanging looks, meaningful glances that made my skin prickle. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After about 45 minutes, I noticed we were no longer following any discernible trail. The undergrowth was thick, snagging at my clothes and scratching my exposed skin. Sweat beaded on my forehead, not just from exertion but from growing anxiety. "Hey, guys," I called out, my voice sounding thin in the dense forest. "Are you sure we're going the right way? I don't see any signs of a trail." Mike turned back, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Don't worry, we're almost there. Just a little further." I nodded, swallowing hard. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The cheerful birdsong from earlier had given way to an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of our footsteps and my increasingly rapid breathing. Finally, we emerged into a small clearing. My heart sank as I realized there was no breathtaking view, just more trees and a sheer cliff face. "I don't understand," I said, turning to face the group. "Where's the viewpoint?" The atmosphere changed in an instant. The friendly smiles were gone, replaced by cold, calculating stares. Mike took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed away. "Oh, there's a view all right," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Just not the one you were expecting." My back hit the cliff face and panic surged through me. "What's going on? What do you want?" Sarah let out a chilling laugh. "What we want? We want everything you've got. Your gear, your money, your identity, and you're going to give it all to us." My mind raced, searching for a way out. but they had positioned themselves between me and the only exit from the clearing. I was trapped. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just take my stuff. I won't tell anyone, I swear. Just let me go." Mike shook his head, pulling a knife from his belt. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, we can't risk you running back and alerting the rangers. No, you're going to have a little accident. It's tragic, really. Solo hiker, unfamiliar terrain, one wrong step." The reality of my situation hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just robbers. They were killers, and I was their next victim. Adrenaline surged through my veins. In that moment, survival was all that mattered. I feigned a move to the right, then ducked left, trying to slip past Mike. But he was faster, his hand shooting out to grab my arm. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but he was too strong. His fingers dug into my flesh as he dragged me back towards the cliff edge. The others closed in, their faces masks of cruel determination. My heel hit a rock, and I stumbled, nearly going over the edge. Mike's grip on my arm was the only thing keeping me from plummeting to my death. The irony wasn't lost on me, my would-be killer momentarily becoming my lifeline. As I teetered on the brink, time seemed to slow. I saw the knife in Mike's other hand, inching closer to my throat. I saw Sarah and the others, watching with a mix of anticipation and cold indifference. And I saw my life, flashing before my eyes in a cliché I never thought I'd experience. In that moment of clarity, a surge of defiance welled up inside me. I wasn't going to die here, not like this. With every ounce of strength I had left, I wrenched my arm free from Mike's grasp. The sudden movement caught him off guard. He stumbled forward, his eyes widening in surprise as he lost his balance. I watched in shock as he tipped over the edge, his scream echoing off the cliff face as he plummeted out of sight. For a split second, everyone froze. Then chaos erupted. Sarah lunged at me, her face contorted with rage. I ducked, feeling her fingernails graze my scalp as she missed her grab. The other man came at me from the side, but in his haste, he tripped over a root. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. I could hear them behind me, their shouts growing fainter as I put distance between us. I had no idea where I was going. The forest all looked the same, an endless maze of trees and shadows, but I kept running, driven by pure survival instinct. Every snapping twig made me flinch, every rustling leaf sent a jolt of terror through me. After what felt like hours, I burst out onto a trail. Actual, beautiful, man-made trail. I could have wept with relief. Instead, I pushed on, my legs trembling with exhaustion but refusing to give up. Finally, mercifully, I saw buildings ahead, the visitor center, safety. As I staggered into the parking lot, I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. A park ranger rushed over, concern etched on his face. "Sir, are you all right? What happened?" The words tumbled out of me in a jumbled mess. The group, the fake viewpoint, the attack, the chase. The ranger's eyes widened as he listened, immediately calling for backup on his radio. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, statements, and search parties. They found Mike's body at the base of the cliff, just where I said he'd fallen. But Sarah and the others had vanished without a trace. As I sat in the ranger station, wrapped in a shock blanket and nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I had nearly died. I had watched a man die. And somewhere out there, the others were still free, possibly looking for their next victim. The head ranger approached, his face grim. "We're going to need you to stay in the area for a while, sir. We'll have more questions, and we'll need your help identifying the suspects." I nodded numbly, knowing that even when I left Yosemite, I'd never truly escape what had happened here. The memory of that day would stay with me forever. The fake smiles, the cold eyes, the feeling of utter helplessness as I stood on the edge of that cliff. But I had survived. Against all odds, I had made it out alive. And as I looked out the window at the majestic peaks of Yosemite, I made a silent vow. I would never again ignore that little voice of caution. I would never again be an easy target. And someday, somehow, I would find the strength to return to these trails, because I refused to let them take this place from me. Yosemite, in all its beauty and danger, was a part of me now, for better or for worse. The sounds of nature can be soothing, but not when they're footsteps circling your tent at midnight. I never thought I'd fear the wilderness more than any urban jungle, but that night in the forest changed everything. I had always been a bit of a loner, finding more comfort in the rustle of leaves than in the chatter of crowds. So when I decided to take a solo camping trip in the dense forests of northern Michigan, it felt like coming home. The drive up was peaceful, my old Subaru loaded with gear and my spirits high with anticipation. I arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning its descent behind the towering pines. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and evergreens. I breathed deeply, feeling the stress of city life melt away with each exhale. Setting up camp was a familiar ritual. I pitched my tent with practiced ease, arranged my cooking gear, and gathered firewood. As darkness fell, I sat by the crackling fire, enjoying a simple meal of instant noodles and canned beans. The stars emerged one by one, painting the sky with a brilliance you never see in the city. I crawled into my tent around 10 p.m., cocooning myself in my sleeping bag. The night sounds of the forest were my lullaby, the soft hooting of an owl, the distant yip of a coyote, the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. I drifted off to sleep, feeling more at peace than I had in months. But peace, I would soon learn, can be shattered in an instant. I'm not sure what woke me at first. Maybe it was a sudden silence, the absence of the usual forest sounds, or maybe it was some primal instinct, sensing a disturbance in the world around me. Whatever it was, I found myself wide awake in the pitch darkness of my tent, every nerve on high alert. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching on the leaf litter around my tent. At first, I told myself it was just an animal, a deer, perhaps, or a raccoon scavenging for food. But as the steps continued, circling my tent with eerie precision, I knew this was no forest creature. My heart began to race. Its pounding so loud in my ears, I was sure whatever was out there must hear it too. I lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, as the footsteps completed one circuit of my tent, then began another. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The footsteps never faltered, never sped up or slowed down, just that steady, maddening pace, round and round and round. Finally, after what must have been the 10th or 11th circuit, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. I strained my ears, trying to detect any sound, any clue as to what was out there. Then, a new sound. A zipper. My blood ran cold as I realized it was the zipper of my backpack, which I'd left outside the tent. Someone was going through my things. I wanted to shout, to scare them off, but fear had frozen my vocal cords. I could only lie there, paralyzed, as I heard the rustling of my belongings being rifled through. After what seemed an eternity, the sounds stopped. Footsteps again, but this time moving away, fading into the forest. I waited, counting my heartbeats, until I could no longer hear anything but the normal sounds of the night. Only then did I allow myself to move, to breathe normally again. My hand shook as I reached for my flashlight. I knew I should look outside, assess the damage, but terror kept me rooted in place. What if they were still out there, waiting? I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, early morning light was filtering through the tent fabric. Birds were chirping, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. It all seemed so normal, so peaceful, that for a moment I wondered if the night's events had been just a vivid nightmare. But as I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, Reality came crashing back. My campsite, which I had left neat and orderly the night before, was in disarray. My backpack lay open, its contents strewn across the ground. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. My belongings hadn't just been scattered, they had been arranged. My clothes formed a crude circle around the fire pit. My food supplies were stacked in a neat pyramid, and my hiking boots, which I distinctly remembered leaving by the tent, were now hanging from a tree branch, the laces tied in intricate knots. I stood there, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just random vandalism or theft. This was something else, something deliberate. A message, perhaps, though its meaning eluded me. I wanted to leave, to pack up and drive away as fast as I could. But as I looked around at my displaced belongings, I realized it would take time to gather everything. And something told me I shouldn't leave anything behind. So I set about putting my campsite back in order, my eyes constantly darting to the surrounding forest, half expecting to see someone watching me from between the trees. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. As I packed, I took inventory. Surprisingly, nothing seemed to be missing. Even my wallet and phone were untouched. This wasn't a robbery then. But if not that, then what? By mid-afternoon, I had everything packed up and loaded into my car. I sat in the driver's seat, key in the ignition, ready to put this place far behind me. But as I was about to start the engine, a thought struck me. What if they followed me? What if they were waiting somewhere along the road, ready to run me off into the ditch? Paranoia, I told myself. Just paranoia. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew roots quickly. I decided to wait until nightfall. Surely, I reasoned, they wouldn't expect me to drive at night. I could slip away under cover of darkness. So I waited, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, painting the forest in shades of orange and red. As beautiful as it was, I couldn't appreciate it. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every movement in the undergrowth a potential attacker. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with night sounds. But now, instead of finding them soothing, each noise set my nerves on edge. Was that really just an owl hooting, or some kind of signal? Did that rustling sound like footsteps, or was it just the wind? I sat in my car, doors locked, windows up despite the growing stuffiness, my eyes strained against the darkness, watching, waiting. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Then, sometime around midnight, I heard it. Voices. Low, indistinct at first, but growing clearer. They were coming closer. I slouched down in my seat, praying that the darkness would hide me. The voices grew louder. 2, maybe 3 people. They were talking in hushed tones, but their words carried in the still night air. Should be here somewhere. Left in a hurry. Might still be watching. My breath caught in my throat. They were looking for me. The voices were alarmingly close now. I could see flashlight beams sweeping across the trees, coming nearer to my hiding spot. I closed my eyes as if by not seeing them, they wouldn't see me. A light passed over the car. I heard a sharp intake of breath. Then, over here, I found something. This was it. Fight or flight time. And flight was winning. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life, startlingly loud in the quiet forest. I threw the car into drive and stomped on the gas pedal. The tires spun on the loose dirt before finding purchase. The car leapt forward, headlights illuminating 3 startled faces before they dove out of the way. I caught a glimpse of wide eyes, pale faces, dark clothing. Then they were behind me, and I was racing down the narrow dirt road, branches scraping against the sides of my car. I drove like a mad woman, taking turns too fast, bouncing over ruts in the road. I half expected to see headlights in my rearview mirror, but there was only darkness behind me. It wasn't until I hit the main highway that I allowed myself to breathe normally again. I drove through the night, watching the miles tick by on the odometer, putting as much distance between myself and that forest as I could. As the first light of dawn broke the horizon, I finally felt safe enough to pull over at a rest stop. My hands were shaking as I turned off the engine. I sat there for a long time, watching the sky lighten, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who were those people? What did they want? Why did they arrange my belongings in that strange way? I had no answers, only questions that I knew would haunt me for a long time to come. One thing was certain: my days of solo camping were over. The peace I once found in solitude had been shattered, replaced by a wariness I knew would never fully go away. As I pulled back onto the highway, heading home, I glanced at the forest one last time in my rearview mirror. It looked peaceful, inviting even in the early morning light. But I knew better now. I knew that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't the ones that roar and show their teeth, but the ones that whisper in the night and rearrange your world when you aren't looking. The open road beckoned, and I answered its call, leaving the dark forest and its secrets behind. But deep down, I knew a part of me would always be back there, listening for footsteps in the night. The human body is a miracle of evolution, but it's also a goldmine of spare parts if you know where to sell them. I never thought I'd learn that lesson firsthand in a dingy Bangkok hostel, but life has a way of teaching you things you never wanted to know. I'd always dreamed of backpacking through Southeast Asia. The allure of ancient temples, bustling markets, and pristine beaches had called to me for years. So when I finally saved up enough money and vacation days, I packed my bags and boarded a plane to Thailand, my heart full of excitement and my head filled with visions of adventure. Bangkok was my first stop. The city was a sensory overload. The pungent smell of street food mingling with exhaust fumes, the cacophony of tuk-tuks and street vendors, the press of bodies in the crowded streets. It was exhilarating and overwhelming all at once. I checked into a hostel in the Khao San Road area, a popular spot for backpackers. The place was cheap and cheerful, with peeling paint on the walls and a communal bathroom that had seen better days. But it had a certain charm, and the common area buzzed with the energy of young travelers from all over the world. That's where I met Sarah. She was sitting alone, nursing a Chang beer and scrolling through her phone. Something about her caught my eye. Maybe it was the way she seemed both part of the scene and separate from it. I struck up a conversation, and we hit it off immediately. Sarah was from Australia, taking a gap year before starting university. She had an easy laugh and a wealth of stories from her travels. We spent the evening swapping tales and making plans to explore the city together the next day. As we parted ways for the night, Sarah gave me a warm smile. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be an adventure." I had no idea how right she was, or how wrong. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy. My head was pounding, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I chalked it up to jet lag and maybe one too many beers the night before. But as I tried to sit up, I realized something was terribly wrong. My limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The room spun around me, and waves of nausea washed over me. Panic began to set in as I realized I couldn't move. I tried to call out, but my voice came out as a weak croak. The world around me faded in and out of focus. I caught glimpses of unfamiliar surroundings, bare concrete walls, a flickering fluorescent light. This wasn't my hostel room. Then I saw a face looming over me. It took me a moment to recognize Sarah, but when I did, my blood ran cold. Her warm smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look that sent shivers down my spine. "Good, you're awake," she said, her voice devoid of the friendliness from the night before. "I don't try to move. The drugs will wear off soon, but not soon enough for you to cause any trouble." Drugs. My mind reeled, trying to piece together what was happening. Had she slipped something into my drink last night? Where am I?" I managed to croak out. "What's going on?" Sarah's laugh was hollow, mirthless. "You're about to make a very valuable contribution to society," she said. "Well, to certain members of society who can afford it anyway. As the fog in my brain began to clear, the horror of the situation started to sink in. This wasn't a robbery or a kidnapping for ransom. This was something far worse. Your organs will fetch a good price on the black market, Sarah continued, her tone matter of fact, as if she were discussing the weather. You're young, healthy. That's a rare commodity in our line of work. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but my body refused to obey. I could only lie there, terror coursing through my veins, as Sarah began to prepare surgical instruments on a nearby tray. Don't worry, she said, noticing my panicked gaze. We are professionals. You won't feel a thing. Somehow, that was small comfort. Just then, the door opened, and 2 men entered. They were dressed in scrubs, looking for all the world like legitimate medical professionals. But the predatory glint in their eyes told a different story. Is the subject ready? One of them asked Sarah. She nodded. Just about. Give the drugs another few minutes to wear off. We don't want any involuntary muscle spasms during the procedure. Procedure. Such a clinical term for what they were about to do to me. As they discussed the logistics of harvesting my organs, my mind raced, searching desperately for a way out. But with my body still paralyzed and 3 of them watching me, escape seemed impossible. I thought of my family back home, blissfully unaware of the danger I was in. Would they ever know what happened to me? Or would I simply become another statistic, another backpacker who vanished without a trace in a foreign land? The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. I could feel sensation gradually returning to my limbs, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to fight off 3 people. Just as the men were preparing to move me onto a makeshift operating table, a commotion erupted outside, shouts in Thai, the sound of running feet, and then a loud bang as the door flew open. Police officers flooded into the room, guns drawn. Sarah and the 2 men froze, their faces masks of shock and fear. In the chaos that followed, I felt hands on me, gentler this time, helping me to sit up. A paramedic was checking my vitals, asking me questions in broken English. I answered as best I could, my voice shaky and weak. As the police handcuffed Sarah and her accomplices, I learned the truth. The real Sarah, the Australian backpacker whose identity had been stolen, had been found dead in a ditch outside Bangkok 2 weeks ago. The woman who had pretended to be her was part of an organ trafficking ring that preyed on unsuspecting tourists. I had been lucky. Another traveler at the hostel had seen Sarah slipping something into my drink and had alerted the authorities. They had been tracking the ring for months and used me as an opportunity to catch them in the act. The next few days passed in a blur of police statements, embassy visits, and medical checkups. I was physically fine. The drugs had left my system without any lasting effects. But mentally, I was shaken to my core. As I sat in the airport waiting for my flight home, I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind. How quickly my dream vacation had turned into a nightmare. How close I had come to having my life literally carved away from me. The bustling terminal around me suddenly felt threatening. Every friendly face could be hiding sinister intentions. Every offer of help could be a trap. But as I boarded the plane, a small part of me refused to let this experience define me. Yes, I had seen the darkest side of humanity, but I had also witnessed its best, in the fellow traveler who had saved my life, in the police officers who had rescued me, in the embassy staff who had helped me get home. The world was still full of wonders and adventures. It was also full of dangers, some hidden in plain sight. But now I was wiser, more cautious. I would travel again someday, but with open eyes and a guarded heart. As the plane took off, carrying me away from Bangkok and the horrors I had experienced there, I made a silent vow. I would live my life to the fullest, for myself and for all those who weren't as lucky as I had been. My organs were my own, and I intended to use them for a long, long time. The scars of that night in Bangkok would stay with me forever, invisible but deep. They were a reminder of how precious life is, and how quickly it can be threatened. but they were also a testament to my survival, to the strength I didn't know I had. As I watched the lights of Bangkok fade away beneath the clouds, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was alive, I was whole, and I was going home. The adventure I had sought had turned out to be far more than I bargained for, but in the end, I had gained something invaluable, a new perspective on life, and a deeper appreciation for every beat of my still intact heart. They say no good deed goes unpunished. I never truly understood that saying until I picked up a hitchhiker on a lonely stretch of highway. What started as an act of kindness turned into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. It was the third day of my cross-country road trip. I had always dreamed of driving from coast to coast, taking in the changing landscapes and experiencing the heart of America. The open road beckoned, and I answered its call with enthusiasm. I had just crossed the border into Nevada, the endless desert stretching out before me. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that came with the vast emptiness surrounding me. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb out, looking desperate. My first instinct was to keep driving. After all, I'd heard all the horror stories about picking up strangers. But something about his dejected posture and the middle-of-nowhere location made me reconsider. I slowed down, my conscience winning out over caution. As I pulled over, I got a better look at him. He was a man in his mid-30s, with shaggy brown hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were dusty and worn, like he'd been on the road for a while. "Where you headed?" I called out through the passenger window. "Anywhere but here," he replied with a weak smile. "Name's Jack. I've been walking for hours." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "Hop in. I'm heading west. I can take you as far as the next town at least." Jack's face lit up with relief as he climbed into the car. "Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver." As we pulled back onto the highway, I introduced myself and tried to make small talk. Jack was polite but vague about his circumstances. He mentioned something about a job falling through and needing a fresh start. I didn't push for details. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. We chatted about mundane things, the weather, the landscape, our favorite road trip snacks. But as the sky darkened and the miles ticked by, I began to notice changes in Jack's behavior. He became increasingly agitated, constantly looking over his shoulder and fidgeting in his seat. His responses to my questions became shorter, almost curt. The easy rapport we had established earlier evaporated, replaced by a tension I couldn't quite explain. "You okay?" I asked, glancing over at him. "We can stop if you need a break." Jack's head snapped towards me, his eyes wild. "No, no stops. We need to keep moving." The intensity in his voice made me grip the steering wheel tighter. Something was definitely off. "Look, man," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I think maybe this is far enough. There's a gas station coming up. I can drop you off there." That's when everything went sideways. In a flash, Jack pulled out a knife. The blade glinted in the dim light of the dashboard. My heart leapt into my throat. "Keep driving," he growled, all pretense of friendliness gone. "And don't even think about trying anything stupid." My mind raced. How had I been so naive? I should have trusted my initial instincts. Now I was trapped in a car with an armed, unstable stranger, miles from anywhere. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "I don't have much money, but you can have it all." Jack laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "This isn't about money. I need to get away, far away, and you're my ticket out of here." As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This wasn't a simple robbery. I was being kidnapped. "Listen," I said, desperately trying to reason with him. "Whatever trouble you're in, this isn't the way to handle it. Let me help you. We can go to the police." "Shut up," Jack shouted, pressing the knife closer to my side. "Just drive. I'll tell you where to go." For the next few hours, we drove in tense silence, broken only by Jack's occasional directions. He had me turn off the main highway onto smaller, less traveled roads. With each mile, we drove deeper into the desert, farther from civilization and any hope of rescue. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. Could I overpower him? Crash the car? Each option seemed more desperate and dangerous than the last. As dawn broke, painting the desert in pale light, Jack finally spoke again. "Pull over here." We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but sand and scrub brush. My heart pounded as I brought the car to a stop. Was this where it would end? "Get out," Jack ordered, gesturing with the knife. On shaky legs, I stepped out of the car. Jack followed, keeping the weapon trained on me. "Start walking," he said, nodding towards the expanse of desert. "You're just going to leave me out here?" I asked, disbelief and fear warring in my voice. Jack's eyes were cold. "You should have minded your own business. Now walk." I took a few steps, my mind whirling. I couldn't just let him take my car and leave me stranded in the desert. I'd die out here. In that moment, fueled by desperation and adrenaline, I made a decision. I spun around and lunged at Jack, catching him off guard. We grappled, the knife between us, each fighting for control. I felt a sharp pain in my side but ignored it, focusing all my energy on wrenching the knife away. Finally, with a burst of strength I didn't know I possessed, I managed to disarm him. The knife fell to the ground, and I kicked it away. Jack stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and fury, but without his weapon, the balance had shifted. I saw fear replace the anger in his eyes. "It's over," I panted, my side throbbing where the knife had grazed me. "We're going to the police, now." But Jack had other ideas. With a final, desperate look, he turned and ran into the desert. I watched him go, too exhausted and in too much pain to give chase. I collapsed against the car, the adrenaline fading and the full impact of what had happened hitting me. I was alive, but I was injured and still miles from anywhere. With trembling hands, I checked my phone. No signal, of course. I was on my own. I got back in the car, wincing at the pain in my side. It wasn't too deep, but it was bleeding steadily. I found an old t-shirt in my bag and pressed it against the wound. As I started the engine, I looked out at the vast desert. Somewhere out there, Jack was running, though I couldn't imagine he'd get far in this unforgiving landscape. Part of me felt guilty for leaving him, but self-preservation won out. I needed to get help, for myself, and to alert the authorities about Jack. I drove for what felt like hours, the pain in my side a constant reminder of how close I'd come to a much worse fate. Finally, blessedly, I saw signs of civilization, a small town shimmering in the distance like a mirage. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, relief washing over me as I spotted a payphone. Within minutes, the police and an ambulance were on their way. As I sat in the back of the ambulance, being treated for my wound, I gave my statement to the police. They assured me they would search for Jack, though given the vastness of the desert, I wasn't optimistic about their chances of finding him. In the days that followed, as I recovered in a local hospital, I learned more about Jack. He was wanted in 3 states for a string of violent crimes. I had unwittingly picked up a dangerous fugitive. The police praised me for my bravery, but I didn't feel brave. I felt foolish for having put myself in that situation in the first place. The road trip I had dreamed about for so long had turned into a nightmare I couldn't wait to wake up from. As I was discharged from the hospital, the doctor gave me a stern look. "You're lucky," he said. "A few inches deeper, and that knife would have hit something vital. Be more careful who you let into your car in the future." I nodded, knowing I had learned that lesson the hard way. My cross-country adventure was over. All I wanted now was to go home, to sleep in my own bed and try to forget the terror of those hours in the desert with Jack. But as I boarded the plane that would take me back east, I knew forgetting wouldn't be easy. The scars, both physical and emotional, would serve as a constant reminder of that night. The vast openness of the American West, which had once filled me with wonder, now seemed ominous and threatening. The kindness I had always prided myself on had nearly cost me my life. Yet, as the plane took off, I found myself looking down at the patchwork landscape below with a mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, but also a newfound respect for the unpredictability of life and the strength I had discovered within myself. I had set out on this trip looking for adventure and self-discovery. I had found both, though not in the way I had expected. The road had tested me, pushed me to my limits, and shown me what I was capable of when my back was against the wall. As we soared above the very highways I had traveled, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let this experience break me. I would learn from it, grow from it, and one day, when the nightmares faded and the scars healed, I would return to the open road, but next time I'd keep on driving when I saw a hitchhiker. I've always believed that true enlightenment comes from within, but I never imagined it would be buried so deep beneath layers of fear and betrayal. The spiritual retreat that promised inner peace nearly cost me my life, and the only thing I found was a darkness I never knew existed. It all started with a simple ad: find yourself in the forests of Oregon. 7 days of meditation, nature walks, and self-discovery. It seemed perfect. I had been feeling lost, drowning in the noise of my daily life, desperate for some clarity. The retreat promised to be the reset button I so desperately needed. I arrived at the secluded location on a crisp autumn morning. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and a light mist hung over the forest, giving everything an ethereal quality. It felt magical, like I had stepped into another world. Our group was small, just 10 of us, all seeking something we couldn't quite define. We were greeted by Martin, our guide for the week. He had a calm demeanor and spoke with a soft, reassuring voice that immediately put me at ease. His eyes, though, were intense, almost piercing, as if he could see right through to your soul. "Welcome," he said, his arms spread wide. "You've taken the first step on a journey of transformation. Here, you will shed your old selves and be reborn." Looking back, I should have recognized the red flag in those words, but at the time, it sounded exactly like what I needed to hear. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. We meditated at dawn, took long walks through the forest, and shared our thoughts and feelings in group sessions. Martin led us through exercises designed to break down our emotional barriers and connect with our true selves. But as the days wore on, I began to notice subtle changes. Martin's teachings became more intense, more focused on letting go of our past selves. He spoke of severing ties with the outside world, of committing fully to our new path. Some of the others in the group seemed to be falling deeper under Martin's spell. They hung on his every word, their eyes glazed over with adoration. I watched as Sarah, a quiet accountant from Michigan, gave away her wedding ring, claiming it was a symbol of her old life. I tried to shake off my growing unease. Wasn't this what I had come for? To change, to find a new perspective? But something in my gut told me this wasn't right. On the 5th night, Martin announced we would have a special ceremony. "Tonight," he said, his eyes gleaming in the firelight, "we will transcend the physical and touch the divine." We gathered in a clearing deep in the forest. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the proceedings. Martin began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, and the others joined in. The sound rose and fell, hypnotic and unsettling. Then Martin produced a small vial of liquid. "This," he said, "will help us see the truth. It will open our minds to the universe." He began to pass the vial around. I watched as, one by one, my fellow retreatants drank without hesitation. When it came to me, I hesitated. Martin's eyes locked onto mine, challenging, almost threatening. I pretended to drink, holding the liquid in my mouth and spitting it out when no one was looking. Almost immediately, I could see the effects on the others. Their eyes glazed over, and they began to sway to some unheard rhythm. Martin started talking about shedding our old selves, about being reborn, but his words had taken on a sinister edge. He spoke of sacrifice, of leaving behind not just our old lives, but our old bodies. As I watched in horror, two of the men in our group began to lead Sarah towards a crude altar they had constructed. She went willingly, a beatific smile on her face. Martin raised a knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. In that moment, I knew I had to act. I couldn't just stand by and watch this happen, but I was outnumbered, and they were in some kind of trance. I needed help. I slipped away while they were distracted, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they would hear it. I ran through the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to get away, to find help. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a small creek. I followed it, hoping it would lead me to civilization. The forest was alive with night sounds, every snapping twig making me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, sure that at any moment I would see Martin or one of his followers pursuing me. Finally, I saw lights through the trees, a small town, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I burst out of the forest onto a quiet street, probably looking like a madwoman, dirty, disheveled, wild-eyed with fear. I found a diner that was still open and burst in, gasping for breath. The few patrons looked up in shock. "Please," I managed to say between gulps of air. "I need help. There are people in danger." The waitress, bless her heart, didn't hesitate. She called the police immediately. As we waited for them to arrive, she sat me down, brought me water, and listened as I poured out my story. I could see the disbelief in her eyes, but to her credit, she didn't dismiss me. When the police arrived, I told them everything. About Martin, the retreat, the ceremony. I could tell they were skeptical, but something in my desperate plea must have convinced them to at least check it out. They asked me to lead them back to the retreat site. The journey back through the dark forest was terrifying, every shadow seeming to hide a threat. But with the solid presence of the officers beside me, I found the strength to go on. We reached the clearing just as dawn was breaking, but it was empty. The altar was gone. The fire, nothing but cold ashes. There was no sign of Martin or any of the others. The police searched the area thoroughly, but found nothing to corroborate my story. No vials of strange liquid, no knives, no evidence of any kind of ceremony. They took me back to town, questioning me further. I could see the doubt in their eyes growing with each passing moment. In the end, they told me they would keep investigating, but without any evidence or other witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to go home, to seek help if I was having trouble. I left Oregon feeling shaken and confused. Had I imagined it all? The ceremony, the knife, Sarah being led to the altar. It all seemed so real. But with each passing day, as I tried to readjust to my normal life, it began to feel more and more like a vivid nightmare. I tried to find information about Martin or the retreat online, but it was as if they had never existed. The website where I had found the original ad was gone. I reached out to the hotel where I had stayed the night before the retreat, but they had no record of my stay. Weeks turned into months. I went to therapy, trying to make sense of what had happened. My therapist suggested that stress and isolation might have caused me to have a break with reality. Part of me wanted to believe her, to accept that it had all been in my head. It would have been easier that way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been real. The fear I had felt that night in the forest was too visceral, too raw to have been imagined. And sometimes, late at night, I would wake up in a cold sweat, sure that I could hear Martin's voice chanting in that strange language. I never went on another spiritual retreat. The peace and clarity I had sought in those woods continued to elude me. Instead, I was left with a constant sense of unease, a feeling that the world was not what it seemed. Every time I saw a missing persons report, I wondered if they too had gone seeking enlightenment and found something far darker. I thought about Sarah, about the others in the group. Where were they now? Had they been reborn as Martin had promised? Or had they met a far more sinister fate? In the end, the experience changed me, but not in the way I had hoped when I first saw that ad. I learned that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from the outside world, but from our own desperate desire to believe in something, anything that promises to give our lives meaning. I still meditate sometimes, still seek moments of peace and clarity, but I do it on my own terms now, wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers. The forest that had once seemed so full of promise now feels threatening, hiding secrets I'm not sure I want to uncover. And sometimes, when the wind whispers through the trees, I could swear I hear Martin's voice calling me back to that clearing, promising rebirth. But I know now that some offers are too good to be true, and some journeys of self-discovery lead to places from which there is no return. The engine of my van had never sounded so loud as it did that night, when its gentle purr threatened to become my death knell. I'd always thought the danger in camping came from wild animals or the elements, not from the hunters who stalk human prey. I'd been on the road for 3 months, living out of my converted van, chasing the dream of freedom and adventure that so many of us yearn for. The idea was simple: work remotely, travel the country, and live life on my own terms. No rent, no roots, just the open road and endless possibilities. That particular evening, I'd found what I thought was the perfect spot for some stealth camping. It was a secluded clearing off a rarely used Forest Service road in Northern California. The towering redwoods created a natural canopy, their ancient presence making me feel small and insignificant in the best possible way. I went through my usual routine, parking the van, setting up my portable solar panel, and preparing a simple dinner on my camping stove. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I sat in my folding chair, nursing a beer and feeling utterly at peace. If only I'd known then how quickly peace can shatter. The first hint that something was amiss came around midnight. I'd been asleep for a couple of hours when a sound jolted me awake. At first I couldn't place it, a rhythmic crunching that seemed out of place in the quiet forest. Then I realized footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps, moving with purpose. My heart rate quickened as I peered out the small window of my van. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. That's when I saw them. 3 men, dressed in dark clothing, carrying what looked like rifles. They were moving slowly, deliberately, scanning the area as if searching for something or someone. Fear gripped me as I realized the gravity of the situation. These weren't park rangers or fellow campers. The way they moved, the weapons they carried, these men were hunters, and I had a sickening feeling that I was their prey. I ducked down, praying they hadn't seen me. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Had I unknowingly camped on private property? Was this some kind of militia patrol, or was it something even more sinister? The footsteps grew closer, and I heard low voices murmuring. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. These men meant business. I held my breath, willing my heart to stop pounding so loudly in my chest. A beam of light swept across my van, and I froze. Had they spotted me? I heard one of the men say something, and the footsteps changed direction. Moving away from my vehicle, I allowed myself a small sigh of relief. But I knew I wasn't out of danger yet. For what felt like hours, I remained still, listening intently to every sound. The men seemed to be patrolling the area, their footsteps fading and then returning at regular intervals. I was trapped, unable to start the van and drive away without alerting them to my presence. As the night wore on, my mind conjured up increasingly terrifying scenarios. What if they were human traffickers, looking for lonely travelers to abduct? Or maybe they were part of some dark web hunting game, where unsuspecting campers became unwilling participants in a deadly sport. Each time their footsteps neared my van, I held my breath, certain that this would be the moment they discovered me. But each time they passed by, continuing their patrol, it was a twisted game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse who didn't even know the rules. Around 3 a.m., I heard a new sound, the low rumble of an engine in the distance. The footsteps quickened, moving away from my van. I chanced to look out the window and saw the men converging on a dirt road at the edge of the clearing. A few moments later, a large truck appeared, its headlights off. The men gathered around the truck, and I strained to hear their conversation. I caught fragments: shipment, border, payment, that painted a disturbing picture. These weren't just any criminals. I had stumbled into the middle of a major smuggling operation. For the next hour, I watched as they unloaded crates from the truck, carrying them deeper into the forest. I didn't know what was in those crates, and I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there, and fast. But how? My van was my only means of escape, but starting the engine would immediately give away my position. I was outnumbered and unarmed. My only hope was to somehow slip away unnoticed. I formulated a plan, risky as it was. I would wait until they made another trip into the forest with their crates. Then, I would push my van as far as I could with the engine off, hoping to get enough momentum to coast down the slight incline of the Forest Service road. Once I was far enough away, I'd start the engine and floor it. It was a desperate plan, but it was all I had. The next time the men disappeared into the trees, I made my move. With shaking hands, I quickly packed up my essential belongings into a backpack, just in case I had to abandon the van and flee on foot. Then, as quietly as I could, I opened the driver's side door. The hinges creaked, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet forest. I froze, certain I'd been discovered. But no shouts came, no running footsteps. Taking a deep breath, I slipped out of the van and moved to the back. Pushing a 2-ton vehicle is no easy feat, especially when you're trying to do it silently. Every muscle in my body strained as I leaned into the van, willing it to move. For a heart-stopping moment, it didn't budge. Then, slowly, agonizingly, it began to roll. Inch by inch, I guided the van towards the road, my ears straining for any sound of returning footsteps. Sweat poured down my face, and my arms trembled with exertion. But the fear of discovery gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the crest of the small hill that led down to the main road. This was it, the point of no return. Once I let the van start rolling down the hill, there would be no turning back. I took one last look at the clearing. The truck was still there, its dark bulk ominous in the moonlight. There was no sign of the men, but I knew they could return at any moment. It was now or never. With a deep breath, I gave the van one final push and jumped into the driver's seat. The van began to roll, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it descended the hill. The trees seemed to rush by, branches scraping against the sides of the vehicle. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, guiding the van down the twisting road. Each turn was a heart-stopping moment, the van's momentum threatening to send me careening into the trees. But somehow, I managed to keep it on the path. As I neared the bottom of the hill, I knew it was time. I turned the key in the ignition, saying a silent prayer. The engine roared to life, shattering the night's silence. I stomped on the gas pedal, and the van leapt forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw flashlights bobbing in the darkness. Shouts echoed through the trees. They had discovered my escape. I drove like I'd never driven before, taking each turn at breakneck speed. The van rattled and shook, protesting the abuse. But I couldn't slow down. In the distance, I heard the roar of another engine. They were in pursuit. For miles, I sped through the dark forest, taking random turns, desperate to lose my pursuers. Every set of headlights I saw filled me with dread. Were they gaining on me? Had they called for reinforcements? It wasn't until I reached a main highway that I finally allowed myself to breathe. I merged into the sparse late-night traffic, trying to look as normal as possible despite my racing heart and shaking hands. I drove through the night, not stopping until the sun began to peek over the horizon. When I finally pulled into a rest stop, hundreds of miles away from that clearing, the full weight of what had happened hit me. I broke down, sobs racking my body as the fear and adrenaline finally found release. In the days that followed, I debated whether to go to the police, but what could I tell them? I had no proof, no names, not even a clear location. In the end, I chose to put as much distance between myself and Northern California as possible. My dream of carefree van life was shattered. The open road, once a symbol of freedom, now felt fraught with hidden dangers. Every secluded spot, every quiet forest, held the potential for unseen threats. I still live in my van, still travel, but now I stick to established campgrounds, well-lit areas, places where other people are always within earshot. The solitude I once craved has been replaced by a need for the safety of numbers. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself straining to hear footsteps in the darkness. The fear may have faded, but it never truly goes away. It's a constant reminder that freedom comes with a price, and that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that walk on two legs. The Swiss Alps are breathtaking, they say. What they don't tell you is how quickly that beauty can turn deadly when you're lost, alone, and being hunted by someone you thought was a friend. I'd always dreamed of hiking in the Swiss Alps, the majestic peaks, the pristine lakes, the crisp mountain air. It all called to me. So when I finally had enough savings and vacation time, I didn't hesitate. I packed my bags, flew to Switzerland, and set out on what I thought would be the adventure of a lifetime. The first few days were everything I'd imagined and more. The trails were challenging but rewarding, each bend revealing vistas more stunning than the last. I'd opted to hike solo, relishing the solitude and the chance to move at my own pace. In the evenings, I'd chat with other hikers at the mountain huts, sharing stories and tips before retiring to my bunk. It was on the fourth day that I met Lucas. I was taking a break, perched on a rock and admiring the view of a glacier in the distance. When he approached, he was about my age, with a friendly smile and an easygoing demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Quite a view, isn't it?" he said, his English tinged with a slight German accent. We struck up a conversation, and I learned he was from Munich, taking some time off to explore the Alps. He seemed knowledgeable about the area and even gave me some tips on the best trails to take. As we talked, I found myself warming to Lucas. It was nice to have some company after days of solitary hiking. When he suggested we hike together for a while, I agreed without hesitation. We set off, with Lucas leading the way. He told me he knew a shortcut that would take us to a spectacular viewpoint off the main trail. I hesitated for a moment. I'd always been taught to stick to marked paths, but Lucas assured me it was safe. "I've been here many times," he said with a confidence that quelled my doubts. "Trust me, it's worth it." So I followed him, leaving the well-trodden path behind. At first, everything seemed fine. The route was more challenging, picking our way over loose rocks and through dense underbrush. But Lucas navigated it with ease. As we climbed higher, the landscape became more rugged. The friendly chatter that had filled our first hours together dwindled, replaced by the sound of our labored breathing in the thin mountain air. It was then that I started to notice little things that didn't quite add up. Lucas's gear, which I had initially thought was top-notch, showed signs of wear that seemed inconsistent with his claims of being an experienced hiker. And some of the landmarks he pointed out didn't match what I remembered from my map. A seed of unease planted itself in my mind, growing with each step we took further from the main trail. But I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, I realized we should have reached the viewpoint by now. When I mentioned this to Lucas, his demeanor changed. The friendly smile vanished, replaced by a tightness around his eyes. "We're almost there," he said, his tone clipped. "Just a bit further." but a bit further, turned into another hour of hiking and still no viewpoint. The beautiful sunset had given way to twilight, and a chill was settling into the air. That's when I decided enough was enough. "Lucas," I said, stopping in my tracks, "I think we should head back. It'll be dark soon, and we're not prepared for night hiking." He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my blood run cold. Gone was any pretense of friendliness. His gaze was hard, calculating. "We're not going back," he said, his voice low and menacing. In that moment, I knew I was in serious trouble. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Who was Lucas really? What did he want? "What's going on?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Why are we out here?" Lucas laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the surrounding rocks. "You tourists are all the same, so trusting, so naive. Did you really think I was just some friendly hiker?" He took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed away. "Your gear alone is worth a small fortune, and I'm betting you've got cash, credit cards, all sorts of valuable things in that backpack of yours." The reality of the situation hit me like an avalanche. I wasn't just lost in the mountains, I was being robbed, and possibly worse. "Take it," I said, shrugging off my backpack. "Take everything. Just let me go." But Lucas shook his head. "It's not that simple. You've seen my face. You could identify me." Fear, cold and paralyzing, washed over me. This wasn't just a robbery. Lucas had never intended for me to make it off this mountain. In that moment of realization, survival instinct kicked in. Without thinking, I threw my backpack at Lucas as hard as I could. It caught him off guard, hitting him squarely in the chest. As he stumbled, I turned and ran. I had no idea where I was going. The trail, if you could call it that, was barely visible in the fading light, but I ran anyway, fueled by pure adrenaline. Behind me, I could hear Lucas cursing, his footsteps pounding as he gave chase. The terrain was treacherous. Loose rocks skittered under my feet, threatening to send me tumbling down the steep slope. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through undergrowth, but I didn't slow down. Lucas's voice echoed behind me, sometimes sounding closer, sometimes further away. The mountains played tricks with the sound, making it impossible to tell where he was. As full darkness fell, my flight became even more dangerous. I could barely see where I was putting my feet. More than once, I nearly went over the edge of a drop-off, catching myself at the last second. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that nightmarish chase. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but still I pushed on, because I knew that to stop was to die. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small cave, little more than a hollow in the rock face. Desperate for a moment to catch my breath, I squeezed inside. The space was tight, barely big enough for me to curl up in, but it offered a moment of refuge. As I huddled there, trying to quiet my ragged breathing, I heard Lucas pass by. He was muttering to himself, his voice a mix of anger and frustration. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't discover my hiding spot. For hours, I remained in that cave, too terrified to move. Every sound, the wind whistling through the rocks, small animals scurrying about, made me flinch. I was sure that at any moment, Lucas would find me. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the mountains, I finally dared to emerge from my hiding place. My body protested, stiff from hours of being cramped in one position, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had no idea where I was. Without my backpack, I had no map, no water, no food. I was utterly lost in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. But I was alive, and that was something. I picked a direction and started walking, hoping to find my way back to a marked trail. Every shadow made me jump. Every snapping twig had me looking over my shoulder. The beautiful mountains that had so enchanted me just days ago now seemed menacing, hiding potential dangers around every boulder. It was late afternoon when I heard the most beautiful sound I've ever heard, the whir of helicopter blades. Search and rescue had been called, probably when I failed to check in at the next mountain hut as planned. As the helicopter landed in a small clearing, I broke down in tears of relief. The rescue team was shocked at my condition, dehydrated, exhausted, covered in cuts and bruises. When I told them my story, they immediately radioed for the police. In the following days, as I recovered in a hospital in Zurich, I learned more about Lucas. He wasn't German at all, but a local man with a long history of petty crime. He had been preying on solo hikers for months, but had always managed to evade capture. They found my backpack, along with several others, stashed in a remote cave. But of Lucas himself, there was no sign. He had vanished into the mountains as if he'd never existed. I flew home a week later. My dream hiking trip turned into a nightmare. The physical wounds healed quickly, but the emotional scars ran deep. For months, I jumped at every unexpected sound, saw threats in every friendly stranger. It's been years now, and I've slowly regained my love for hiking and the outdoors. But I never hike alone anymore, and I never, ever leave the marked trails. The mountains are still beautiful, still majestic. But now I know that they can also be deadly, hiding dangers far worse than any natural hazard. And sometimes, on nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself back on that mountain, running for my life from a man I thought was a friend. In those moments, I'm reminded that the most dangerous predators are often the ones that look just like us. The taste of freedom is sweetest when it's been ripped away from you. I never truly appreciated that until I found myself behind bars in a foreign land, desperately trying to prove my innocence in a system designed to presume guilt. It was supposed to be a routine business trip to Moscow. As a senior executive for a multinational tech company, I'd made dozens of similar journeys. Fly in, close the deal, fly out, simple, efficient, and usually quite boring. This time, however, would be anything but routine. The first few days went smoothly. Meetings were productive, the local team was enthusiastic, and it looked like we were on track to finalize a major contract. To celebrate our progress, Victor, one of the company's executives, invited me to dinner at an upscale restaurant. The food was excellent, the vodka flowed freely, and the conversation was engaging. Victor was particularly interested in our company's latest innovations. In retrospect, perhaps a bit too interested. But in the moment, buoyed by good food and alcohol, I thought nothing of it. I even showed him some confidential documents on my tablet, eager to impress our potential partners. As we parted ways that night, Victor shook my hand warmly. "To a successful partnership," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I should have noticed that, should have sensed something was off. But I was too caught up in the euphoria of a deal nearly closed. The next morning, I was jolted awake by loud banging on my hotel room door. Before I could fully register what was happening, the door burst open and several police officers stormed in, shouting in rapid-fire Russian. Confused and still half asleep, I didn't resist as they roughly handcuffed me and began searching the room. One of them held up my tablet, saying something that sounded accusatory. Another officer thrust a document in my face, an arrest warrant, though I couldn't read the Cyrillic script. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. There must be some mistake. One of the officers, his face stern, replied in heavily accented English, "You are under arrest for theft of company secrets. Come with us now." My mind reeled. Theft? Company secrets? This had to be a misunderstanding. But as they led me out of the hotel in handcuffs, the seriousness of the situation began to sink in. Passers-by stared, some taking photos with their phones. I felt exposed, vulnerable, my world crumbling around me. At the police station, things went from bad to worse. The interrogation room was small and stuffy, with harsh fluorescent lighting that made my head pound. 2 detectives questioned me for hours, their English limited and my Russian non-existent. They accused me of stealing proprietary information from the Russian company we were partnering with, claiming they had evidence on my tablet. I tried to explain that I had only shown Victor some basic information, nothing proprietary, but they didn't believe me, or perhaps didn't want to believe me. They showed me documents I had never seen before, alleging they were found on my device. When I denied knowledge of them, the detectives grew angry, their questions more aggressive. As the interrogation dragged on, I asked repeatedly to contact the U.S. Embassy or a lawyer. Each time I was told, soon, soon. But soon never came. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, I was thrown into a holding cell. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I was alone in a foreign country, accused of a crime I didn't commit, with no idea how to prove my innocence. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and fear. I was moved to a larger prison, processed, and assigned to a crowded cell. The other inmates eyed me warily. A foreigner, clearly out of place in this harsh environment. It was 3 days before I was finally allowed to contact the U.S. Embassy. The consular officer who visited me looked concerned, but could offer little immediate help. "We'll do what we can," she said, "but you need to understand that the Russian legal system works differently from ours. This could take time." Time. That was something I suddenly had too much of, yet not enough. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. My company initially supported me, hiring a local lawyer to handle my case. But as time dragged on and negative publicity mounted, their support waned. Eventually, they distanced themselves from me entirely, claiming they had no knowledge of my illegal activities. My lawyer, a tired-looking man named Dmitri, did his best, but it was clear he was fighting an uphill battle. "The evidence against you is strong," he told me during one of our meetings. "Those documents on your tablet, they're very damaging." "But I've never seen those documents before," I protested. "Someone must have planted them." Dmitri sighed. "Proving that will be difficult. In cases like these, the courts tend to favor the prosecution." As my trial date approached, I fell into despair. The possibility of spending years in a Russian prison loomed over me like a dark cloud. I thought of my family back home, my career in tatters, my life as I knew it over. But then, a glimmer of hope. During one of our meetings, Dmitri's eyes lit up with an idea. "The restaurant," he said, "where you had dinner with Victor, did it have security cameras?" I nodded, not sure where he was going with this. "If we can get that footage, we might be able to prove that Victor had access to your tablet. It's a long shot, but it could cast doubt on the prosecution's case." It was a slim chance, but it was all we had. Dmitri worked tirelessly to secure the footage, battling bureaucracy and reluctant restaurant owners. Finally, just days before the trial, we got lucky. The footage clearly showed Victor handling my tablet while I was distracted by a phone call. In the courtroom, I sat nervously as Dmitri presented our case. He argued passionately that I was the victim of a setup, possibly industrial espionage. The security footage, while not conclusive proof of my innocence, was enough to plant seeds of doubt. The trial dragged on for weeks. Every day was a test of endurance, sitting through hours of testimony in a language I didn't understand, trying to glean what I could from my lawyer's hurried translations. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge rendered his verdict. Not guilty. The words washed over me like a wave, relief flooding every fiber of my being. I was free. The nightmare was over. But as I walked out of the courthouse, blinking in the bright Moscow sunlight, I realized that free was a relative term. My reputation was in tatters, my career likely unsalvageable. The company I had worked so hard for had abandoned me, and the experience had left deep scars, both emotional and psychological. As I boarded the plane back to the States, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also anger at the injustice I had faced, and fear of what the future held. The Moscow skyline disappeared beneath the clouds, and with it, a chapter of my life I would never forget. Back home, I tried to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. Job interviews often ended abruptly when my Russian incident came up. Friends and even some family members seemed unsure how to act around me, as if my experience had somehow changed who I was fundamentally. In time, I started my own consulting firm, using my experience to help other businesses navigate the treacherous waters of international partnerships. I became an advocate for reform in international business law, sharing my story as a cautionary tale. Years have passed, but the memories of those months in Russian prison still haunt me. Sometimes, I wake up in a cold sweat, my mind back in that cramped cell. The sound of keys jangling still makes my heart race, but I've also gained something from the experience, a deeper appreciation for freedom, for justice, and for the importance of integrity in business and in life. I learned the hard way that sometimes the price of success can be too high. Now, when I travel for business, I'm more cautious. I guard information carefully, trust sparingly, and always stay alert. Because I know firsthand how quickly a routine business trip can turn into a fight for freedom and justice in a foreign land. The click of a camera shutter can capture a moment of beauty, but it can also seal your fate. I never imagined that my passion for wildlife photography would lead me into a deadly game of cat and mouse with armed poachers in the heart of a national park. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. I'd saved for years to go on a solo photography expedition to South Africa's Kruger National Park. As a wildlife enthusiast and amateur photographer, the chance to capture images of the Big Five in their natural habitat was a dream come true. The first few days were nothing short of magical. I'd managed to photograph elephants bathing in a watering hole, a pride of lions lounging in the afternoon sun, and even a pair of elusive leopards. Each click of my camera felt like I was preserving a piece of wild, untamed Africa. On the fourth day, I decided to venture into a more remote area of the park. My guide, a local named Themba, had told me about a hidden spot where rhinos often gathered at dusk. The chance to photograph these endangered creatures was too good to pass up. We set out in the late afternoon, our jeep bumping along dusty trails rarely used by tourists. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the savanna in warm golden hues, Themba brought the vehicle to a stop. "We'll go on foot from here," he whispered, his eyes scanning the landscape. "Remember, absolute silence. Rhinos have poor eyesight, but their hearing is excellent." I nodded, shouldering my camera bag. We crept through the bush, the dry grass crunching softly under our feet. After about 15 minutes, Themba held up a hand, signaling me to stop. He pointed silently, and my heart leapt. There, about 100 yards away, was a group of white rhinos. Their massive gray bodies stood out against the golden grass, their horns silhouetted against the setting sun. It was a photographer's dream. I raised my camera, adjusting the settings with trembling fingers. Just as I was about to take the shot, a sharp crack echoed across the plain. It sounded like a gunshot. The rhinos scattered, disappearing into the bush with surprising speed for creatures so large. Themba grabbed my arm, his face etched with worry. "Poachers," he hissed. "We need to leave, now." But curiosity and a misplaced sense of duty overrode my common sense. "We should report this," I whispered back, "if we can get evidence." Themba shook his head vehemently, but I was already moving, creeping towards where the sound had come from. Reluctantly, he followed. As we neared a small clearing, I heard voices, men speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I peered around a large acacia tree and felt my blood run cold. 4 men stood in the clearing, armed with high-powered rifles, but it was what lay at their feet that made my stomach churn. A rhino, its magnificent horn brutally hacked off, blood staining the dusty ground. Without thinking, I raised my camera and started shooting. The rapid-fire click of the shutter seemed deafening in the tense silence. One of the men's heads snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then all hell broke loose. "Run!" Themba yelled, grabbing my arm and yanking me away. We crashed through the bush, thorns tearing at our clothes, branches whipping our faces. Behind us, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. Themba was a few paces ahead, his knowledge of the terrain our only advantage. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering bark off a tree inches from my head. I ducked instinctively, nearly losing my footing. "Keep going," Themba urged, his voice strained. We ran for what felt like hours, the sounds of pursuit sometimes fading, sometimes growing alarmingly close. As darkness fell, the bush became a maze of shadows, every sound amplified by our fear. Finally, Themba pulled me into a small cave formed by an overhanging rock. We crouched there, our breathing ragged, straining to hear any sign of the poachers. "What do we do now?" I whispered, once I had caught my breath. Themba's face was grim in the dim light. "Oh, we wait. The park rangers will be looking for us by now. But so are the poachers, if they find us first." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The night stretched on endlessly. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made us tense, expecting to see the barrel of a gun appear at any moment. I clutched my camera, the evidence it contained now a dangerous burden. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we heard a new sound, the distant whir of helicopter blades. Hope surged through me, but Themba remained cautious. "It could be a park ranger chopper," he whispered. "Or it could be the poachers, buyers coming to collect the horn. We can't risk moving until we're sure." So we waited, the sound growing louder, then fading, then returning. It was maddening, not knowing if it heralded rescue or doom. Suddenly, a voice crackled through a megaphone, barely audible but unmistakably speaking English. "This is Kruger Park Rangers. If you can hear this, signal your location." Relief flooded through me, but Themba held me back. "Wait," he cautioned. "It could be a trick." But as the voice repeated the message, this time mentioning my name and Themba's, we knew it was genuine. We stumbled out of our hiding place, waving our arms frantically. The helicopter spotted us quickly, landing in a nearby clearing. As rangers poured out, rifles at the ready, scanning the area for threats, I felt my knees go weak. It was over. We were safe. The debriefing at park headquarters was intense. I handed over my camera, the photos I had taken now crucial evidence in the fight against poaching. The park director, a stern-faced woman named Miriam, looked at me with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You took an incredibly foolish risk," she said, her tone softening slightly. "But these photos, they could make a real difference. We've suspected for some time that there was a large-scale poaching operation in the park, but we've never had solid evidence until now." In the days that followed, as I gave statements to police and park officials, the full scope of what I had stumbled upon became clear. The poachers were part of a sophisticated international syndicate, with connections reaching into high levels of government and business. My photos, along with Themba's testimony, provided the missing link the authorities needed to launch a major operation. Within weeks, arrests were made, not just of the poachers we had seen, but of corrupt officials and wealthy buyers as well. As for me, I found myself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero by conservation groups. Journalists wanted interviews. Documentary filmmakers sought my story. It was overwhelming and, if I'm honest, a little frightening. A little. The poaching syndicate had long arms, and there was always the nagging fear of retaliation. But more than that, I struggled with the knowledge of what my actions had set in motion. Yes, dangerous criminals had been caught, and perhaps some rhinos would be saved. But I also knew that for every poacher arrested, there were desperate people waiting to take their place, driven by poverty and lack of opportunity. The experience changed me profoundly. I couldn't go back to being just an amateur photographer, not after what I'd seen. I began working with wildlife conservation groups, using my images to raise awareness about the devastating impact of poaching. I returned to Kruger a year later, this time as part of an anti-poaching education initiative. The park felt different now, still beautiful, still wild, but with an undercurrent of vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. Themba had been promoted to head ranger, his bravery and quick thinking during our ordeal recognized by park management. When we met again, there was a bond between us that went beyond words, forged in those terrifying hours of flight and hiding. As we stood watching the sun set over the savannah, a family of rhinos grazing peacefully in the distance, Themba turned to me with a smile. "You know," he said, "most people come to Africa to shoot animals with their cameras. You managed to shoot down an entire poaching ring." I laughed, but it was a laugh tinged with the weight of all that had happened. My camera hung at my side, a reminder of the power and responsibility that comes with bearing witness. The African bush stretched out before us, beautiful and dangerous, a world of vibrant life and ever-present death. I raised my camera, focusing on the rhinos, marveling at their prehistoric silhouettes against the ruby sky. As I pressed the shutter, the familiar click seemed to echo with new meaning. Each photo was no longer just an image, but a testament, a call to action, a reminder of what's at stake in the fight to preserve the wild places and creatures of our world. The light faded, and darkness crept across the land. But in that moment, watching over the rhinos with a friend who had become a brother, I felt a fierce hope. The night was full of dangers, yes, but the dawn would come, and we would be there to greet it, cameras in hand, ready to capture and protect the wild heart of Africa. The gentle rocking of a cruise ship can lull you into a false sense of security. But when you witness a murder at sea, that peaceful sway becomes the rhythm of a nightmare you can't escape. I had always dreamed of taking a Caribbean cruise. The idea of sailing through crystal-clear waters, visiting exotic islands, and indulging in endless food and entertainment seemed like the perfect escape from my mundane office job. When I finally booked my trip on the majestic seas, a luxurious liner promising the ultimate vacation experience, I was ecstatic. The first few days were everything I had hoped for and more. I lounged by the pool, sipping colorful cocktails and chatting with fellow passengers. I tried my luck at the casino, watched dazzling shows in the evening, and ate more food than I thought humanly possible. It was paradise. On the fourth night of the cruise, I decided to take a late-night stroll on the deck. The air was warm and salty, and the moon cast a silvery path across the dark waters. Most passengers were either asleep or enjoying the nightclub, leaving the deck peacefully empty. As I rounded a corner, heading towards the bow of the ship, I heard raised voices coming from one of the smaller lounges. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowed my pace, straining to hear. "You can't do this?" A man's voice, panicked and pleading. "We had a deal." "Deals change," replied another voice, cold and menacing. "You should have known better than to try and double-cross us." I edged closer to the partially open door, my heart racing. This was clearly more than just a heated argument. "Please, I'll get you the money. I just need more time." The first voice was desperate now. "Time's up," said the second voice. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. I peered through the crack in the door just in time to see a tall man in a dark suit grab the other man by the throat. There was a flash of metal, a muffled cry, and then the sickening sound of a body crumpling to the floor. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp, stumbling backward. My mind reeled, unable to process what I had just witnessed. A murder. I had just seen a murder. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure what to do. Then I heard movement from inside the lounge, and panic took over. I turned and ran, my bare feet slapping against the deck as I fled back to my cabin. Once inside, I locked the door and sank to the floor, trembling. What should I do? Alert the ship's security? But what if the killer had connections on board? On a cruise ship, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I spent the night in a state of high alert, jumping at every sound in the corridor outside. By morning, exhausted and frayed, I decided I needed to tell someone. I made my way to the purser's desk, constantly looking over my shoulder. The cheerful young woman behind the counter smiled brightly as I approached. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" I leaned in close, lowering my voice. "I need to speak with security. It's urgent." Her smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Of course, sir. May I ask what this is regarding?" I hesitated, suddenly aware of how crazy I might sound. I witnessed something last night. Something terrible." She nodded, her expression turning serious. "I see. If you'll just wait a moment, I'll have our head of security come speak with you." As I waited, my paranoia grew. What if the killer saw me talking to security? What if he was watching me right now? A tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp, white uniform approached. "Sir, I'm Chief Morris, head of ship security. I understand you have something to report." I nodded, glancing around nervously before speaking in a low voice. "Last night I saw a murder in the Starlight Lounge." Chief Morris's eyebrows shot up. "A murder? Are you certain?" I recounted what I had seen and heard, my words tumbling out in a rush. As I spoke, the chief's expression grew increasingly grave. "This is a very serious accusation," he said when I finished. "We'll need to investigate immediately. Please, come with me." He led me to a small office and asked me to wait while he gathered his team. As I sat there, my mind raced. What if they didn't believe me? What if the killer had already disposed of the body? When Chief Morris returned with 2 other security officers, I repeated my story. They asked detailed questions about what I had seen and heard, taking careful notes. "We'll conduct a thorough search of the Starlight Lounge," Chief Morris assured me. "In the meantime, I must ask you to keep this information confidential. We don't want to cause a panic among the passengers." I nodded, relieved that they were taking me seriously but still on edge. As I left the security office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety. I tried to go about my normal vacation activities, but every face I saw seemed suspicious. Was that man by the pool the killer? Did that woman in the buffet line know something? By evening, I was a nervous wreck. I jumped at every announcement over the ship's PA system, half expecting it to be news of a body found. But nothing came. As I picked at my dinner in the main dining room, a hand landed on my shoulder. I nearly leapt out of my skin. "Sir," it was one of the security officers from earlier. "Chief Morris would like to see you." My heart pounding, I followed him back to the security office. Chief Morris was waiting, his expression unreadable. "We've conducted a thorough search of the Starlight Lounge and the surrounding areas," he said once we were seated. "I'm afraid we found no evidence of any crime taking place." I stared at him in disbelief. "But I saw it. I heard it." Chief Morris held up a hand. "I understand you believe what you saw was real, but we've reviewed the security footage, interviewed staff members who were on duty last night, and found nothing to corroborate your story." "The footage," I said, grasping at straws. "Can I see it? Maybe I can point out the men I saw." The chief shook his head. "I'm sorry, but we can't share security footage with passengers. It's against company policy." I slumped in my chair, defeat washing over me. They didn't believe me. Or worse, what if they were in on it? "Sir," Chief Morris leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Is it possible that what you saw was a misunderstanding? Perhaps a rehearsal for one of the ship's theatrical productions?" I wanted to argue, to insist that what I had seen was real. But doubt had begun to creep in. Had I imagined it all? Was the stress of my job, the sudden freedom of vacation, playing tricks on my mind? I don't know anymore," I admitted, My voice small. Chief Morris nodded sympathetically. It's not uncommon for passengers to experience vivid dreams or misinterpret things they see, especially if they're not used to the shipboard environment. I can assure you, if there had been any foul play, we would have found evidence of it. I left the security office feeling dazed and confused. As I wandered the ship's corridors, every laugh, every shadow seemed to mock me. Had I really imagined the whole thing? The next few days of the cruise passed in a haze. I went through the motions of enjoying my vacation, but the joy had been sucked out of it. I couldn't shake the memory of what I had seen, or thought I had seen. On the last night of the cruise, as I packed my suitcase, there was a knock at my cabin door. My heart leapt into my throat. Had the killer finally come for me? With trembling hands, I opened the door to find a ship's steward holding an envelope. "Message for you, sir," he said cheerfully, handing it over before continuing on his rounds. Inside the envelope was a simple note. "Thank you for your discretion. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. Sam." I stared at the note, my mind whirling. Sam. Chief Morris. Was this confirmation that I hadn't imagined things after all? Or was it just a polite thank you for not causing a panic among the other passengers? As the ship docked the next morning and I joined the throng of passengers disembarking, I found myself scanning the crowds. Was the killer among us, blending in with the excited tourists heading home? Or had he slipped away at one of our port stops, vanishing into the Caribbean sunshine? I never got answers to these questions. In the years since that cruise, I've turned the events over in my mind countless times. Sometimes I'm convinced it was all real, a cover-up of a terrible crime. Other times, I wonder if it was just an overactive imagination fueled by too many mystery novels. One thing's for certain, I never went on another cruise. The gentle rocking of a ship that once promised relaxation now only reminds me of that night, of the thin line between paradise and nightmare, and how quickly one can become the other. To this day, whenever I see an advertisement for a luxury cruise, I think of moonlight on dark water, raised voices behind a partially open door, and the sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. And I wonder about the secrets that might be hiding behind those glossy images of sunsets and smiling passengers. Because sometimes, the most dangerous waters are the ones you're sailing through, blissfully unaware of the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. Family reunions are supposed to be about reconnecting and making happy memories. No one tells you they can also be about uncovering dark secrets and fighting for your life. I learned that lesson the hard way at our lake house last summer. It had been years since the entire family had gotten together. Life, as it tends to do, had scattered us across the country. So when Grandpa suggested we all meet at the old lake house in Minnesota for a week, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to reconnect. I arrived on a sunny afternoon, the gravel driveway crunching under my tires as I pulled up to the sprawling wooden house. The lake sparkled in the distance, and the air was filled with the scent of pine. It was exactly as I remembered from childhood summers. Grandpa was the first to greet me, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile as he enveloped me in a bear hug. "Good to see you, kiddo," he said, though I was well into my 30s now. Over the next few hours, the rest of the family trickled in. Aunts, uncles, cousins, faces I hadn't seen in years, all gathering in the large living room, catching up and reminiscing. The atmosphere was jovial, filled with laughter and the excited chatter of reunited relatives. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was subtle at first, a tension in the air, quick glances exchanged between certain family members. I noticed my Uncle Dave, in particular, seemed on edge. He kept checking his phone, his brow furrowed with worry. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but my journalist instincts were tingling. Years of chasing stories had honed my ability to sense when something wasn't quite right. As night fell and most of the family retired to their rooms, I decided to get some fresh air. The lake house had a beautiful wraparound porch, perfect for stargazing. I was leaning against the railing, enjoying the cool night breeze when I heard hushed voices coming from around the corner. "Can't keep this up much longer, Dad." Uncle Dave's voice, strained and angry. "The creditors are breathing down my neck. I need that money now." "Patience, David." Grandpa's voice, usually so warm and kind, had a hard edge to it. "We'll sort this out, but not at the expense of the family legacy." "Legacy?" Dave scoffed. "What good is a legacy if we're all bankrupt?" I held my breath, not daring to move. What was going on? What money were they talking about? "The trust fund stays where it is," Grandpa said firmly. "It's for all of the grandchildren, not just to bail you out of your bad investments." There was a moment of tense silence, then the sound of footsteps stomping away. I waited a few minutes before quietly making my way back to my room, my mind reeling with questions. The next morning I woke early, the conversation from the night before still echoing in my head. As I made my way to the kitchen for coffee, I passed by Grandpa's study. The door was ajar, and I could see him inside, poring over some papers. "Everything okay, Grandpa?" I asked, pushing the door open a bit more. He looked up, startled, then quickly shuffled the papers into a drawer. "Of course, sweetheart. Just some boring old paperwork, nothing for you to worry about." But I could see the worry lines etched deep in his forehead, the way his hands shook slightly as he closed the drawer. The day progressed with family activities, swimming in the lake, a big barbecue lunch, board games in the afternoon. But underneath the veneer of familial happiness, I could sense currents of tension. Uncle Dave was sullen, barely participating. Grandpa kept disappearing into his study. And Aunt Sarah, Dave's wife, seemed to be watching everyone with a calculating gaze. That night, unable to sleep, I decided to do some digging. I knew it was wrong to snoop, but my curiosity and concern for Grandpa overrode my better judgment. I crept down to the study, using the flashlight on my phone to navigate. The drawer Grandpa had so hastily closed was locked, but years of picking locks for investigative stories came in handy. Inside, I found financial documents, legal papers, and a thick folder labeled Trust Fund. As I flipped through the papers, a picture began to emerge. The family's wealth, which I had always assumed came from Grandpa's successful business, was actually old money, very old money, and it was tied up in a complex trust that Grandpa controlled. Uncle Dave, it seemed, had made some risky investments and lost big. He was deeply in debt and had been pressuring Grandpa to release the trust fund money early. But doing so would mean less for the rest of the grandchildren when we came of age. I was so engrossed in the documents that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching until it was too late. The study door creaked open, and I looked up to see Uncle Dave standing there, his face a mask of fury. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, advancing into the room. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. "Dave, I can explain." But he wasn't interested in explanations. In 2 quick strides, he was across the room, grabbing my arm roughly. "You nosy little brat. You have no idea what you're meddling in." I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Let go of me, Dave. You're hurting me." "Oh, I'll do more than hurt you if you don't keep your mouth shut," he growled, his face inches from mine. I could smell alcohol on his breath. "This is none of your business. You understand me?" Suddenly, another voice cut through the tension. "Let her go, David." Grandpa stood in the doorway, his usually kind face hard with anger. Dave released me, stepping back. "Dad, I can explain." "Enough." Grandpa's voice cracked like a whip. "I've had enough of your excuses, your threats. This ends now." What followed was a heated argument that woke the entire house. Family members came rushing in, confusion turning to shock as the truth came out. Uncle Dave's debts, his desperate attempts to get the trust fund money, even threats he had made against Grandpa. In the chaos that ensued, I slipped out onto the porch, my head spinning. How had a simple family reunion turned into this nightmare of secrets and betrayal? As dawn broke over the lake, casting a pale light over the scene, the police arrived. Someone, I later learned it was Aunt Sarah, had called them. Uncle Dave was taken away in handcuffs, shouting accusations and threats. The rest of us sat in stunned silence in the living room as Grandpa finally told us everything. The trust fund, the family's hidden wealth, Dave's spiral into debt and desperation. It was like something out of a soap opera, except it was happening to us, to our family. "I'm sorry," Grandpa said, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought I was protecting you all by keeping this secret. I never imagined it would come to this." In the days that followed, we rallied around Grandpa. The reunion, needless to say, was cut short. But as traumatic as the experience had been, it had also brought us closer together. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years, about the secrets, about the money, about what it meant to be a family. Uncle Dave eventually pleaded guilty to charges of attempted extortion. Aunt Sarah filed for divorce. The trust fund was restructured, with more transparency and safeguards put in place. As for me, I couldn't look at our family the same way again. The rose-tinted memories of childhood summers at the lake were now colored by the knowledge of the secrets and lies that had simmered beneath the surface for years. But there was a silver lining. In uncovering the truth, in facing the darkness that had lurked in our family's shadows, we found a new strength, a new honesty in our relationships. The lake house, once a symbol of carefree summers and family unity, now stood as a reminder of how quickly things can change, how the people we think we know can surprise us, for better or worse. As I drove away at the end of that tumultuous week, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the lake house growing smaller in the distance. I realized that family isn't just about shared blood or happy memories. It's about facing the hard truths together, about choosing to stand by each other even when the facade of perfection crumbles. The next family reunion, we decided, would be held somewhere new. A fresh start, without the weight of secrets hanging over us. And as I merged onto the highway, heading back to my life, I felt a mix of sadness and hope. Our family had been shaken to its core, but we had survived. And maybe, just maybe, we would be stronger for it. The lake disappeared from view, and with it, the last vestiges of my childhood innocence. But ahead lay a future where our family, battle-scarred but resilient, could build something new, something real. And that, I realized, was worth more than any trust fund. They say the walls have ears, but in that secluded cabin, it was the eyes I had to worry about. Hidden cameras turned my peaceful getaway into a claustrophobic nightmare, and I learned that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones you invite into your life. I'd been dreaming of this vacation for months. The stress of my high-pressure job in the city had been wearing me down, and the idea of a week alone in a cozy cabin, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence, seemed like heaven. When I found the listing online for a rustic retreat in the heart of the Adirondacks, I didn't hesitate to book it. The drive up was beautiful, the road winding through increasingly dense forest. As I pulled up to the cabin, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease. It was picture perfect, a sturdy log structure with a wide porch, smoke curling from the chimney. The owner, a friendly older man named John, was waiting to greet me. "Welcome to your home away from home," he said with a warm smile, handing me the keys. "Everything you need should be inside. If you need anything, I'm just a phone call away. Enjoy your stay." I thanked him and watched as he drove away, leaving me alone in the growing twilight. The silence was immediate and absolute. No car horns, no sirens, no chattering crowds, just the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the occasional bird call. I breathed deeply, savoring the pine-scented air. The interior of the cabin was just as charming as the outside. Rustic furniture, a stone fireplace, and large windows overlooking the forest. I unpacked quickly, eager to settle in and start my relaxation. That first evening was blissful. I cooked a simple meal, opened a bottle of wine, and curled up with a book by the fire. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt more peaceful than I had in years. The next morning, I woke early, excited to explore the surrounding woods. I spent hours hiking, marveling at the untouched beauty of the forest. When I returned to the cabin, pleasantly tired and hungry, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the space felt different somehow. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my city dweller paranoia. But as I moved around the cabin, the feeling persisted. It was as if the very air had changed, become charged with an unseen presence. That's when I noticed it, a small dark spot on the bookshelf, just above eye level. At first, I thought it was a knot in the wood, but as I looked closer, my blood ran cold. It was a camera lens, barely visible but unmistakable to my eyes. My heart racing, I began to search the cabin more thoroughly. In the bedroom, I found another camera hidden in the smoke detector. The bathroom had one tucked into the vent. Even the kitchen wasn't safe. A tiny lens peered out from inside the clock on the wall. Panic set in as the reality of my situation became clear. I was being watched. Every moment of privacy, every intimate act had been recorded. But by whom and why? My first instinct was to run, to jump in my car and drive as fast and as far as I could. But as I looked out the window at the darkening sky and the dense forest beyond, I realized I had no idea where I was. In my excitement for a secluded getaway, I hadn't paid much attention to the route we'd taken. My phone had no signal here, and I hadn't seen another house for miles. I was trapped. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to think rationally. Whoever had placed these cameras clearly didn't want me to know about them. As long as I pretended everything was normal, I might be safe until I could figure out a plan. So I went through the motions of my evening routine, all the while my mind racing. Was it John, the friendly owner? Or was someone else watching? Someone who had accessed the cabin without his knowledge? That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling and jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every noise a potential intruder. As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, I made my decision. I had to get out, no matter what. I packed my bags as quietly as possible, trying to act normal in case someone was watching the live feed. Just as I was about to open the front door, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was here. Through the peephole, I saw John's truck pulling up. He stepped out, carrying a bag of groceries, that same friendly smile on his face. But now, knowing what I knew, that smile seemed sinister, predatory. I opened the door, forcing a smile of my own. "John, what a surprise." "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Thought I'd bring you some fresh supplies. How are you enjoying your stay?" The casual tone, the normalcy of it all, made my skin crawl. Did he know that I knew? Was this all part of some sick game? "It's been great," I lied, my voice surprisingly steady. "But actually, I just got a call from work. Emergency. I have to head back to the city immediately." John's smile faltered for just a moment. A flicker of something, disappointment, anger, crossing his face. "Oh, that's a shame. Are you sure you can't stay? The weather report says there's a storm coming in. Might not be safe to drive." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. He didn't want me to leave. "I'm sure," I said firmly, gesturing to my packed bags. "Thanks for everything, but I really must go." For a long moment, we stood there, the tension palpable. I was acutely aware of how isolated we were, how easily things could turn violent. My car keys felt heavy in my pocket, my only chance at escape. Finally, John's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if you must, drive safely." I nodded, skirting around him to my car. Every step felt like a mile, my back tingling with the certainty that at any moment he might lunge at me. But somehow, miraculously, I made it to the car. As I pulled away, I saw John in my rearview mirror, standing on the porch, watching me go. I didn't breathe easily until the cabin disappeared from view. Once I hit the main road, I drove straight to the nearest police station. The officers were skeptical at first. Hidden cameras, a creepy cabin owner. It sounded far-fetched, but something in my demeanor, the raw fear in my voice, convinced them to investigate. What they found chilled me to the bone. Not only were there cameras throughout the cabin, but there was a hidden room filled with monitors, recording equipment, and files on previous guests. John, it turned out, had been running this scheme for years, selling the footage to the darkest corners of the internet. The investigation uncovered a network of similar operations across multiple states. My discovery had blown the lid off a massive voyeuristic crime ring. In the months that followed, as the case made its way through the courts, I struggled to regain a sense of normalcy. I jumped at unexpected noises, felt exposed in my own home, and couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Therapy helped, as did the support of friends and family, but the experience had fundamentally changed me. I looked at the world differently now, always searching for hidden threats, never fully trusting appearances. It was a harsh lesson in the darkness that can lurk behind friendly smiles and picturesque facades. The peaceful cabin in the woods, once a symbol of escape and relaxation, had become a nightmare that followed me into the waking world. Yet, as time passed, I found a strange sort of strength in my experience. I had faced one of my worst fears and survived. I had trusted my instincts, fought back, and helped bring down a criminal enterprise. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life. I learned to enjoy solitude again, to find peace in quiet moments. But I never again took privacy for granted. In hotel rooms, vacation rentals, even in my own home, I was always aware, always vigilant. The world, I had learned, was full of hidden eyes. But now, my eyes were open too. And in that awareness, I found not just fear, but power. The power to protect myself, to trust my instincts, and to never again be an unwitting victim. As I sit here now, writing this story, I can't help but glance around, checking for that telltale glint of a lens. It's a habit I'll likely never break, but I'm no longer paralyzed by fear. Instead, I'm driven by a determination to live fully and freely, to not let the darkness win, because in the end, the most important eyes watching me are my own, and what they see is a survivor, stronger and wiser for having faced the hidden horrors that can lurk in even the most idyllic retreats. The open road has always promised freedom, but I never imagined it could become a prison. What started as an adventure across America's heartland turned into a desperate flight for survival, with every mile bringing me closer to an unknown threat that refused to let me go. I'd always dreamed of taking a cross-country road trip. The idea of driving from coast to coast, watching the landscape change from bustling cities to rolling plains to majestic mountains, had captivated me since I was young. So when I finally had enough savings and vacation time, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my trusty Honda Civic, made a loose itinerary, and set off from my home in Boston, heading west. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. I drove through quaint New England towns, stopped at roadside diners for slice of pie, and marveled at the changing scenery. As I crossed into the Midwest, the land opened up, and I felt a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. It was in a small town in Nebraska, about a week into my trip, that things took a turn. I had stopped for gas at a rundown station on the outskirts of town. As I was filling up my tank, I noticed a group of men lounging near a beat-up pickup truck, watching me intently. Something about their gaze made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as small-town curiosity about an out-of-state visitor. I went inside to pay and grab some snacks for the road. When I came out, the men were gone, but I could have sworn I saw their truck pulling out of the station as I walked to my car. I shook off the paranoia and hit the road again, cranking up the radio and singing along to distract myself. It wasn't until about an hour later that I noticed the truck again. It was far behind me, but I recognized the distinctive rust pattern on its hood. My heart rate picked up a bit, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. After all, There was only one major highway cutting through this part of the state. But as the miles ticked by, the truck remained a constant presence in my rearview mirror. Sometimes it would disappear for a while, only to reappear later, always keeping its distance but never quite letting me out of its sight. By the time the sun started to set, I was in a full-blown panic. I considered pulling over in the next town, maybe finding a police station. But a nagging voice in my head warned me that stopping could be dangerous. What if these men were locals? What if they had connections in the area? In my panicked state, every small town seemed like a potential trap. So I kept driving, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, constantly checking my mirrors. The vast, open landscape that had seemed so liberating just hours ago now felt oppressive. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to lose my pursuers. As night fell, I made a decision. At the next junction, instead of continuing west as planned, I turned south. It was a snap decision, one I hoped would throw off whoever was following me. For a blissful half hour, I saw no sign of the truck. I began to relax, thinking perhaps I had imagined the whole thing. Then, at the crest of a hill, I saw headlights in the distance behind me. My blood ran cold. Somehow, they had found me again. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my little Civic harder than I ever had before. The speedometer crept past 80, then 90, but the headlights kept gaining. My car wasn't built for this kind of speed, and every bump in the road felt like it might send me flying off into the darkness. Suddenly, a new set of headlights appeared ahead of me. Another truck, similar to the one behind me, was barreling towards me head-on. I realized with horror that they were trying to box me in. With seconds to react, I did the only thing I could think of. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, sending my car off the road and onto a dirt track I had barely glimpsed in the darkness. The car bounced violently, and I feared for a moment that I would lose control. But somehow, I managed to keep it together, plunging deeper into the unknown terrain. I killed my headlights, relying only on the faint moonlight to guide me. Behind me, I could hear the roar of engines as my pursuers tried to follow. But their larger vehicles weren't as nimble on the rough ground, and slowly, the sound began to fade. I drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Every bump and jolt sent a spike of fear through me, certain that this would be the moment I hit a ditch or a rock and it would all be over. But somehow, miraculously, I kept going. Finally, when I could no longer hear any sign of pursuit, I allowed myself to slow down. I was completely lost, surrounded by what looked like farmland, with no idea which direction would lead me back to civilization. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel, and my heart was pounding so loud I was sure it could be heard for miles. I pulled to a stop in the shadow of what looked like an old barn, killed the engine, and sat in the darkness, straining my ears for any sound of approaching vehicles. But there was nothing. Just the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of my situation sank in. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, being hunted by unknown assailants for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom. My mind raced with questions. Who were these people? What did they want? How had they managed to follow me for so long without me noticing? I checked my phone, hoping against hope for a signal. But there was nothing. I was truly on my own. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the sky, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here, and I couldn't go back the way I had come. My only option was to push forward and try to find help. I started the car, wincing at how loud the engine seemed in the pre-dawn quiet air, and began to drive. I chose my direction almost at random, hoping it would lead me to a main road or a town. After about an hour of careful driving, avoiding main roads and sticking to backcountry lanes, I finally saw signs of civilization. A small town appeared on the horizon, and I felt a glimmer of hope. But as I approached, that hope turned to dread. There, parked in front of the town's only gas station, was the rust-covered truck that had started this nightmare. I didn't slow down, didn't even consider stopping. I sped through the town as fast as I dared, praying that no one would spot me. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure emerge from the gas station, pointing in my direction. Moments later, the truck's engine roared to life, and so the chase began again. I pushed my car to its limits, taking turns at dangerous speeds, constantly looking for any opportunity to lose my pursuers. But they seemed to know the area better than I did, anticipating my moves, always managing to stay on my tail. It wasn't until I crossed the state line into Colorado that I finally managed to shake them. The mountains provided cover, and the winding roads allowed me to use my car's smaller size to my advantage. By the time I reached Denver, I was exhausted, terrified, and completely paranoid. I went straight to the police station, but my story sounded insane even to my own ears. A mysterious group of men chasing me across multiple states for no apparent reason. The officers were skeptical, to say the least. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. I couldn't blame them. If someone had told me this story a week ago, I wouldn't have believed it either. In the end, I abandoned my road trip plans. I sold my car, bought a plane ticket, and flew home, constantly looking over my shoulder in the airport, half expecting to see those men appear at any moment. Back in Boston, I tried to resume my normal life, but something had fundamentally changed. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always looking for potential threats, always planning escape routes. Months passed, and slowly, the fear began to fade, but the experience had left its mark. I never found out who those men were or why they had chased me. Perhaps it was a case of mistaken identity, or maybe I had unknowingly witnessed something I shouldn't have at that first gas station. I'll probably never know. What I do know is that the open road, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now fills me with a sense of vulnerability and dread. The vast expanse of America, which I had so longed to explore, now seems like a dangerous, unpredictable place where anyone could become a target. I still travel, but never by car, never alone. The cross-country road trip of my dreams has become a nightmare I can't shake. And every time I see a rusty pickup truck in my rearview mirror, my heart skips a beat, and for a moment, I'm back on that dark highway, running for my life from an enemy I can't see or understand. The road may go on forever, but for me, that journey is over. Some adventures, I've learned, are better left to the imagination. The line between adventure and nightmare is thinner than you'd think. One wrong turn, one misunderstood word, and suddenly you're fighting for your life against people who see you as a trespasser in their domain. I learned this lesson the hard way in the Appalachian Mountains, where a quest for solitude became a desperate struggle for survival. I'd always been drawn to the idea of solo camping. There's something alluring about being alone in nature, relying solely on your own skills and instincts. So when I found myself with a week of unexpected vacation time, I didn't hesitate. I packed my gear, threw it in my old camper van, and headed for the Appalachians. The drive was beautiful, winding roads taking me deeper into the mountains. As the towns grew smaller and farther apart, I felt the weight of my everyday life lifting off my shoulders. This was exactly what I needed, a complete disconnect from the world. I had a vague destination in mind, a remote area I'd read about online. It was off the beaten path, promising solitude and unspoiled wilderness. As I turned onto an unmarked dirt road, leaving the last signs of civilization behind, a thrill of excitement ran through me. The road got rougher the further I went, my van bouncing over rocks and ruts, but I pressed on, determined to find the perfect spot. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I finally found it. A small clearing near a babbling stream, surrounded by towering pines. I set up camp quickly, eager to settle in for the night. As darkness fell, I sat by my small campfire, listening to the night sounds of the forest. The crackling of the fire, the gentle rush of the stream, the occasional hoot of an owl. It was perfect. I fell asleep that night feeling more at peace than I had in years. The next morning, I woke early, eager to explore. I spent the day hiking, marveling at the untouched beauty around me. By late afternoon, tired but content, I headed back to my campsite. That's when things started to go wrong. As I approached my van, I noticed something was off. The door was slightly ajar, and I was certain I'd locked it. My heart rate picked up as I cautiously approached. Had an animal gotten in? Or worse, another person? I peered inside, and my blood ran cold. The interior had been ransacked. My belongings were strewn about, and several items were missing, including my phone and car keys. Before I could process what this meant, I heard voices in the distance. Gruff, angry voices, getting closer. I ducked behind the van, trying to control my panicked breathing. I'm telling ya, I saw smoke from a campfire round here yesterday. One voice said, gotta be one of them city folks trespassing again. Well, they picked the wrong mountain to mess with, another replied. Let's show them what happens to folks who don't respect private property. My mind raced. Private property? But this was public land, wasn't it? I'd researched it. I was sure. But as the voices got closer, I realized that my certainty didn't matter. These people believed I was trespassing, and they didn't sound like the type to listen to reason. I had seconds to make a decision. My van was useless without the keys, and I had no way to call for help. My only option was to run and hope I could lose them in the forest. I grabbed my backpack, thankful I'd left it outside the van, and took off into the woods as quietly as I could. Behind me, I heard shouts of discovery as they found my campsite. Hey, there's someone here. Find him. The sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush spurred me on. I ran blindly, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and my pursuers as possible. As I ran, branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me at every step, but fear gave me speed and agility I didn't know I possessed. I could hear them behind me, their angry shouts echoing through the trees. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that desperate flight. But eventually the sounds of pursuit faded, and I allowed myself to slow down. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like jelly. I collapsed behind a large fallen tree, trying to catch my breath and figure out what to do next. As my panic subsided, the reality of my situation sank in. I was lost in an unfamiliar forest, with no phone, no car, and no real supplies beyond what was in my small day pack. And somewhere out there, an unknown number of hostile locals were hunting for me. I took stock of what I had. A half-empty water bottle, a few granola bars, a small first aid kit, and a lighter. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. I was afraid to start a fire, worried it would give away my position. Instead, I huddled in the hollow of a large tree, shivering and jumping at every sound. The night seemed endless. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. I dozed fitfully, never fully falling asleep, always on high alert. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but alive. I knew I needed to find my way back to civilization, but I had no idea which direction to go. The sun was rising, so I knew east, but beyond that, I was lost. I picked a direction and started walking, trying to be as quiet as possible. Every so often, I thought I heard voices in the distance, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or just my paranoia. As the day wore on, thirst became my biggest problem. I rationed my water carefully, but by afternoon, the bottle was empty. I remembered from some long-ago survival class that following a stream downhill often led to larger bodies of water and potentially to civilization. So when I came across a small creek, I decided to follow it. The going was tough. The terrain was rocky and steep, and I had to stop often to rest. But the fear of being found kept me moving. It was nearing sunset when I heard the unmistakable sound of voices again. This time, I was sure it wasn't my imagination. They were closer now, and there were more of them. I saw something move down by the creek, a voice called out. Spread out. Don't let them get away." Panic surged through me. They were too close. I couldn't outrun them. Not in this terrain, not in my exhausted state. Desperate, I looked for somewhere to hide. That's when I spotted it. A small opening in the rocky hillside. A cave, or at least a deep crevice. Without hesitation, I squeezed inside. The space was tight and pitch black. I could barely move, but I was hidden. I held my breath as I heard footsteps approaching. "You sure you saw something?" a voice said, so close it made me flinch. "I'm telling you, there was movement," another replied. "Crafty son of a bitch must have found a hiding spot." They searched for what felt like hours. I remained frozen, hardly daring to breathe. My muscles cramped, and my throat burned with thirst, but I didn't dare move. Finally, as the light faded, I heard them moving away. "It's getting too dark. We'll pick up the search tomorrow," one of them said. "Ain't no way they're getting off this mountain without us knowing." I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before allowing myself to relax slightly. But I knew I couldn't stay in the crevice. They'd be back at first light, and I needed to be far away by then. So I crawled out into the darkness and started moving. It was slow going, feeling my way in the dark, constantly afraid of making a noise that would give me away. But as the night wore on, I began to see lights in the distance. Civilization. Hope gave me a second wind. I pushed on, drawn to those distant lights like a moth to a flame. As dawn broke, I stumbled onto a paved road. An hour later, a car driven by a startled early morning commuter picked me up and took me to the nearest police station. The authorities were skeptical of my story at first, but when they ran the plates on my abandoned van and discovered it was on private property, things started to make sense. It turned out the public land I'd found online was outdated information. The area had been sold to a private owner years ago, a reclusive family known for their hostility to outsiders. In the end, I was lucky. I got off with a warning for trespassing, and the police recovered my van and belongings. But the experience left me shaken to my core. I still love nature, still feel the call of the wild, but now I approach it with a newfound respect and caution. I double and triple check my information, always let someone know where I'm going, and I never ever venture into unfamiliar territory alone, because I learned the hard way that sometimes the greatest dangers in the wilderness aren't the animals or the elements. Sometimes the most dangerous thing out there is other people. People who see you as a threat to their way of life. And in those remote places, where the law feels distant and personal justice reigns, a simple misunderstanding can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. The mountains still call to me, but now I hear a warning in their whispers, a reminder that the line between adventure and nightmare is razor thin, and it's all too easy to find yourself on the wrong side of it. They say curiosity killed the cat, but they never mention what it does to marine biology students who stumble upon their mentor's dark secrets. I went to that remote island seeking knowledge about sea life. Instead, I learned how quickly the hunter can become the hunted. It was supposed to be the opportunity of a lifetime. When Dr. Carlson, one of the most renowned marine biologists in the field, invited me to assist with his research on a remote island off the coast of Washington, I couldn't believe my luck. His work on deep-sea ecosystems was groundbreaking, and the chance to study under him was a dream come true for a graduate student like me. The island was tiny, barely a speck on the map. As our small chartered boat approached, I could see the research station perched on the rocky shore, a cluster of prefab buildings that looked almost alien against the rugged landscape. Dr. Carlson stood at the dock to greet us, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Welcome to your home for the next few months," he said, helping me with my bags. "I hope you're ready for some hard work and incredible discoveries." The first few weeks were everything I had hoped for and more. We spent our days collecting samples, analyzing data, and having fascinating discussions about marine life. Dr. Carlson was brilliant, his enthusiasm for the work infectious. I felt like I was learning more each day than I had in entire semesters at university. But as time went on, I began to notice oddities, small things at first. The way Dr. Carlson would disappear for hours without explanation. The locked room in the research station that no one was allowed to enter. The strange sounds I sometimes heard late at night, almost like distressed animal calls, but unlike anything I'd ever heard before. When I asked the other researchers about these things, they brushed off my concerns. That's just how the doc is, they'd say. He's eccentric, but he's a genius. You get used to it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My curiosity, the very trait that had driven me to pursue marine biology, now gnawed at me relentlessly. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to do some exploring. The research station was quiet, everyone else long asleep. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding with each step. As I approached the locked room, I heard it again, that strange, muffled cry that sent chills down my spine. I knew it was wrong, but I had to know what was behind that door. Using the skills I'd picked up in my misspent youth, I managed to pick the lock. As the door swung open, the smell hit me first, a mix of salt water and something else, something organic and wrong. I fumbled for the light switch, and when the fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, I had to stifle a scream. The room was filled with tanks, but these weren't ordinary aquariums. Inside were creatures I had never seen before, things that shouldn't exist. Fish with too many eyes, cephalopods with grotesquely enlarged brains, crustaceans with limbs that looked almost human, and in the largest tank at the back of the room, something so alien I couldn't even begin to classify it. But it wasn't just the creatures themselves that horrified me. It was their condition. Many looked sick or injured, with visible surgical scars, equipment that looked more at home in a medical lab than a marine research facility lined the walls. This wasn't conservation or study. This was experimentation. I was so absorbed in my shock that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until it was too late. Fascinating, isn't it? Dr. Carlson's voice made me jump. I spun around to find him standing in the doorway, his eyes gleaming with an intensity I'd never seen before. I was wondering how long it would take you to find your way in here. Dr. Carlson, what is all this? I managed to stammer out. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. This, my dear, is the future of marine biology. These creatures represent evolutionary leaps that would take millions of years to occur naturally. But with a little nudge, we can accelerate the process. As he spoke, moving from tank to tank with an almost fatherly pride, the full horror of what I was seeing sank in. Dr. Carlson wasn't just studying these animals, he was creating them, modifying them, playing God with the building blocks of life itself. But this is wrong, I said, finding my voice. It's unethical. It's cruel. Dr. Carlson's face hardened. Cruel. What's cruel is the destruction humans have wrought on our oceans. These creatures are the key to survival in a changing world. They're adapted to withstand pollution, temperature changes, acidity levels that would kill their natural cousins. He turned to me, his eyes burning with fervor. Don't you see? This is how we save the oceans, by creating life that can withstand what we've done to them. I shook my head, backing away. This isn't saving anything. It's monstrous. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. I had hoped you would understand, that you would see the importance of this work. But if you can't, he sighed heavily. Well, I'm afraid I can't let you leave this island. The threat in his words was clear. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but I was trapped. Trapped on an island with a man I now realized was dangerously unhinged, surrounded by others who either agreed with him or were too afraid to speak up. What are you going to do? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dr. Carlson smiled, but it was a cold, clinical expression. Do? Why? I'm going to give you the opportunity to contribute to science in the most profound way possible. Your young, healthy body will be perfect for my next series of experiments. Terror surged through me. I looked around frantically for something, anything I could use as a weapon. But before I could move, I felt a sharp prick in my neck. I turned to see one of the other researchers standing behind me, an empty syringe in his hand. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "But the work is too important." As the sedative took hold, my legs gave way. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Dr. Carlson leaning over me, his face a mask of scientific curiosity. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to be, I was strapped to a table in a different room, one that looked like a cross between an operating theater and a mad scientist lab from a horror movie. The other researchers were there, prepping equipment, avoiding my gaze. Dr. Carlson loomed over me, a scalpel glinting in his hand. "Don't worry," he said, misinterpreting my terrified expression. "You won't feel a thing, and just think, you'll be part of something revolutionary." As he lowered the scalpel, I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end. But then, miraculously, I heard a commotion outside, shouting, the sound of breaking glass. Dr. Carlson's head snapped up. "What the hell?" The door burst open, and to my utter shock, I saw men in Coast Guard uniforms pouring in, weapons drawn. "Step away from the table," one of them shouted. "Hands where we can see them." In the chaos that followed, I learned what had happened. My parents, worried when they hadn't heard from me in weeks, had contacted the authorities. When the Coast Guard came to check on the research station and no one answered their hails, they'd staged a raid. The next few days were a blur of debriefings, medical checkups, and police statements. Dr. Carlson and his team were arrested, charged with a laundry list of ethical violations and criminal acts. The creatures in the lab were seized by the government, their fate uncertain. As for me, I was hailed as a whistleblower, even though my discovery had been purely accidental. The scientific community was rocked by the scandal, with heated debates about the ethics of genetic modification and the oversight of remote research stations. But the experience had changed me profoundly. My passion for marine biology remained, but now it was tempered with a deep understanding of the responsibility that comes with scientific knowledge. I couldn't look at the ocean the same way anymore, always wondering what secrets might be hidden in its depths, both natural and man-made. In the years that followed, I dedicated myself to ethical marine research and conservation, determined to protect the oceans without resorting to the extremes I had witnessed. The nightmares of my time on the island faded, but I never forgot the lesson I had learned. Science, for all its potential for good, can be twisted into something dark when divorced from ethics and compassion. It's up to each of us in the scientific community to be vigilant, to question, and to remember that our ultimate responsibility is not to our ambitions or our egos, but to the natural world we seek to understand and protect. The ocean still calls to me, but now I hear in its waves a warning as well as an invitation. A reminder that the greatest monsters aren't always the ones with scales and fins, but sometimes the ones in lab coats who have lost sight of the line between discovery and destruction. They say eavesdroppers never hear anything good about themselves. But what I overheard that night in the Hungarian countryside wasn't about me. It was something far worse, something that turned my peaceful camping trip into a desperate fight for survival. I'd always been drawn to the idea of stealth camping. There's something thrilling about setting up camp in a secluded spot, far from designated campgrounds and prying eyes. So when I planned my backpacking trip through Europe, I made sure to include some off-the-beaten-path adventures in my itinerary. Hungary wasn't originally on my list, but a fellow traveler I met in Vienna raved about the beautiful countryside and suggested I give it a try. "There's this perfect spot," he said, marking a location on my map. "Totally secluded, amazing views. You'll love it." I should have known better than to trust the advice of a stranger, but the promise of solitude and unspoiled nature was too tempting to resist. So I found myself on a local bus, heading deep into the Hungarian countryside, my backpack stuffed with camping gear and a few days' worth of supplies. The bus dropped me off at a small village that seemed frozen in time. Elderly women in headscarves watched curiously as I adjusted my backpack and consulted my map. I smiled and waved, trying to appear friendly and non-threatening, before setting off down a dirt road that led into the rolling hills beyond the village. The hike was beautiful. Fields of golden wheat swayed in the breeze, punctuated by patches of wildflowers. In the distance, I could see dense forests crowning the hills. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, I found the spot my fellow traveler had recommended. It was perfect, a small clearing on the edge of the forest, overlooking a valley. I could see for miles, the countryside bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. I quickly set up my tent and prepared a simple dinner on my camping stove, feeling utterly at peace. As night fell, I crawled into my tent, exhausted from the day's hike, but deeply content. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I drifted off to sleep, looking forward to exploring more of this beautiful area in the morning. I'm not sure what woke me. Maybe it was some primal instinct, a sixth sense that danger was near. But suddenly, I was wide awake, my heart pounding. Something was wrong. Then I heard it. Voices, men's voices, speaking in low, urgent tones. They were close, just on the other side of the thin fabric of my tent. I held my breath, straining to listen. The voices were speaking Hungarian, a language I didn't understand, but their tone was clear enough. They were angry, agitated. I caught a few words that sounded like English names, and something that might have been American. Slowly, carefully, I peered out of my tent. In the moonlight, I could make out 3 men standing a few yards away. They were dressed in dark clothes, and even in the dim light, I could see they were armed. One of them was gesturing angrily, jabbing his finger at a map. I ducked back inside, my mind racing. Who were these men? What were they doing out here in the middle of the night? And why did they sound so angry about Americans? I knew I needed to get out of there, fast. But how? My tent was the only thing between me and them. If I tried to pack up, they'd hear me for sure. As I weighed my options, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The click of a gun being cocked, followed by words I did understand. Check the tent. There was no time to think. I grabbed my backpack, unzipped the back of the tent as quietly as I could, and slipped out into the darkness. I had barely taken 2 steps when I heard shouts behind me. They'd spotted me. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear them behind me, their heavy footsteps and angry shouts spurring me on. I had no idea where I was going. The moonlight that had seemed so beautiful earlier now cast confusing shadows, making every tree look the same. But I didn't dare stop to get my bearing. I just kept running, driven by pure adrenaline and fear. At one point, I heard a gunshot ring out, the sound echoing through the hills. I ducked instinctively, nearly losing my footing on the uneven ground. They were shooting at me. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. These men wanted me dead. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that desperate flight. But eventually, I realized I couldn't hear them anymore. I slowed down, my lungs burning, trying to catch my breath while still listening for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the nocturnal noises of the forest. I allowed myself to stop, slumping against a tree. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation hit me. I was lost in a foreign country, in the middle of the night, with no idea where I was or where to go. And somewhere out there, armed men were looking for me. I needed to find help, but where? I couldn't go back to the village. For all I knew, these men could be from there. I had no phone signal, no way to call for help. I was on my own. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I made a decision. I needed to keep moving. Staying in one place was too risky. I oriented myself using the rising sun and started walking, hoping to find a road, a house, anything that might lead to safety. The day wore on, and I kept walking. My feet were blistered, my body ached, and thirst clawed at my throat. But fear kept me going. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every distant sound had me ducking for cover. It was late afternoon when I finally heard something that gave me hope. The distant rumble of a vehicle. I moved towards the sound cautiously, ready to hide at the first sign of danger. I emerged from the trees to find a narrow paved road. And there, in the distance, was a car approaching. I hesitated for a moment. What if it was them? But I was out of options. I needed help. I stepped out onto the road and waved my arms frantically. The car, an old Fiat, slowed to a stop. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces a mix of concern and wariness. In my broken Hungarian, supplemented with a lot of gesturing, I tried to explain that I was lost, that I needed help. The woman's eyes softened, and she said something to her husband. He nodded, and they motioned for me to get in. As we drove, I tried to explain more about what had happened, but the language barrier was too great. They seemed to understand I was in some kind of trouble, though, and the woman patted my hand reassuringly. They took me to the nearest police station in a small town I didn't catch the name of. There, with the help of a translator, I told my story. The police were skeptical at first. A foreign tourist claiming armed men had chased him through the forest sounded far-fetched, I'm sure. But as they investigated, things started to come together. There had been reports of smugglers operating in the area, using the remote countryside to move contraband across borders. The men I had encountered were likely part of this operation, and I had stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. The next few days were a blur of police statements, embassy visits, and arrangements to get home. I was shaken, exhausted, and more than ready to leave Hungary behind. As I sat in the airport, waiting for my flight home, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly things had gone wrong. One moment, I was enjoying a peaceful night under the stars. The next, I was running for my life through an unfamiliar forest. The experience changed me. I still love to travel, still feel the call of adventure. But now I approach it with more caution, more awareness of the potential dangers lurking in even the most beautiful places. I learned that the world can be a dangerous place, that the line between safety and peril is often thinner than we realize. But I also learned about the kindness of strangers, like the elderly couple who picked up a bedraggled, frightened foreigner on a lonely road. As my flight took off, I watched the Hungarian countryside recede below me. It was beautiful from up here, peaceful, but I knew now what could be hiding in those picturesque forests and fields. I had seen the darkness that can lurk behind the postcard-perfect scenery, and it was a lesson I would never forget. The thrill of stealth camping has lost its appeal for me now. These days, I stick to designated campgrounds, places where other people are within earshot, because I know now that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the wilderness isn't the wildlife or the elements, it's other people. And in those remote places, where help is far away and the normal rules of society feel distant, a simple misunderstanding can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. I still have nightmares sometimes of running through endless dark forests, unseen pursuers always just behind me. But I also dream of that elderly couple, of the kindness in the woman's eyes as she took my hand. And I try to hold on to that, the reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is still good in the world, still people willing to help a stranger in need. It's a balance, I've learned, between adventure and caution, between trusting others and protecting yourself. Finding that balance isn't easy, but it's a journey I'm still on, one careful step at a time. The golden rule of wildlife photography is to never interfere with nature. But what do you do when nature isn't the real predator, and you find yourself caught between man's greed and the last of a dying species. I'd always dreamed of going on a South African safari. The idea of capturing the raw beauty of wildlife in their natural habitat had been my passion since I first picked up a camera. So when I finally saved enough for the trip, I splurged on a package that promised an authentic experience, away from the usual tourist traps. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for and more. We saw elephants bathing in water holes, lions lounging in the afternoon sun, and even a pair of elusive leopards. Each click of my camera felt like I was preserving a piece of wild, untamed Africa. Our guide, Themba, was a fountain of knowledge. His eyes would light up as he shared stories about the animals and the land. "Remember," he'd often say, "we are guests here. We observe, we appreciate, but we never interfere." On the fourth day, Themba told us he had a special treat. "I know a place," he said, his voice low and excited, "where we might see rhinos. It's off the usual routes, but it's worth it." We set off at dawn, our jeep bumping along barely their trails. As the sun climbed higher, painting the savanna in warm golden hues, Themba brought the vehicle to a stop. "We'll go on foot from here," he whispered. "Remember, absolute silence. Rhinos have poor eyesight, but their hearing is excellent." Heart pounding with excitement, I followed Themba and the other tourists into the bush. After about 15 minutes of careful stalking, Themba held up a hand, signaling us to stop. He pointed silently, and my breath caught in my throat. There, about 100 yards away, was a small group of white rhinos. Their massive gray bodies stood out against the golden grass, their horns silhouetted against the sky. It was a photographer's dream. I raised my camera, adjusting the settings with trembling fingers. Just as I was about to take the shot, a sharp crack echoed across the plain. It sounded like a gunshot. The rhinos scattered, disappearing into the bush with surprising speed for creatures so large. Themba's face had gone pale. "Poachers," he hissed. "We need to leave, now." But curiosity and a misplaced sense of duty overrode my common sense. "We should report this," I whispered back. "If we can get evidence." Themba shook his head vehemently, but I was already moving, creeping towards where the sound had come from. Reluctantly, he followed. As we neared a small clearing, I heard voices, men speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I peered around a large acacia tree and felt my blood run cold. 4 men stood in the clearing, armed with high-powered rifles, but it was what lay at their feet that made my stomach churn. A rhino, its magnificent horn brutally hacked off, blood staining the dusty ground. Without thinking, I raised my camera and started shooting. The rapid-fire click of the shutter seemed deafening in the tense silence. One of the men's heads snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then all hell broke loose. "Run!" Themba yelled, grabbing my arm and yanking me away. We crashed through the bush, thorns tearing at our clothes, branches whipping our faces. Behind us, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. Themba was a few paces ahead, his knowledge of the terrain our only advantage. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering bark off a tree inches from my head. I ducked instinctively, nearly losing my footing. "Keep going," Themba urged, his voice strained. We ran for what felt like hours, the sounds of pursuit sometimes fading, sometimes growing alarmingly close. As darkness fell, the bush became a maze of shadows, every sound amplified by our fear. Finally, Themba pulled me into a small cave formed by an overhanging rock. We crouched there, our breathing ragged, straining to hear any sign of the poachers. "What do we do now?" I whispered, once I had caught my breath. Themba's face was grim in the dim light. "We wait. The park rangers will be looking for us by now. But so are the poachers, if they find us first." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The night stretched on endlessly. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made us tense. expecting to see the barrel of a gun appear at any moment. I clutched my camera, the evidence it contained now a dangerous burden. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we heard a new sound, the distant whir of helicopter blades. Hope surged through me, but Themba remained cautious. "It could be a park ranger chopper," he whispered, "or it could be the poachers' buyers coming to collect the horn. We can't risk moving until we're sure." So we waited, the sound growing louder, then fading, then returning. It was maddening, not knowing if it heralded rescue or doom. Suddenly, a voice crackled through a megaphone, barely audible but unmistakably speaking English. "This is Kruger Park Rangers. If you can hear this, signal your location." Relief flooded through me, but Themba held me back. "Wait," he cautioned. "It could be a trick." But as the voice repeated the message, and this time mentioning my name and Themba's, we knew it was genuine. We stumbled out of our hiding place, waving our arms frantically. The helicopter spotted us quickly, landing in a nearby clearing. As rangers poured out, rifles at the ready, scanning the area for threats, I felt my knees go weak. It was over. We were safe. The debriefing at park headquarters was intense. I handed over my camera, the photos I had taken now crucial evidence in the fight against poaching. The park director, a stern-faced woman named Miriam, looked at me with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You took an incredibly foolish risk," she said, her tone softening slightly. "But these photos, they could make a real difference. We've suspected for some time that there was a large-scale poaching operation in the park, but we've never had solid evidence until now." In the days that followed, as I gave statements to police and park officials, the full scope of what I had stumbled upon became clear. The poachers were part of a sophisticated international syndicate, with connections reaching into high levels of government and business. My photos, along with Themba's testimony, provided the missing link the authorities needed to launch a major operation. Within weeks, arrests were made, not just of the poachers we had seen, but of corrupt officials and wealthy buyers as well. As for me, I found myself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero by conservation groups. Journalists wanted interviews. Documentary filmmakers sought my story. It was overwhelming and, if I'm honest, a little frightening. The poaching syndicate had long arms, and there was always the nagging fear of retaliation. But more than that, I struggled with the knowledge of what my actions had set in motion. Yes, dangerous criminals had been caught, and perhaps some rhinos would be saved. But I also knew that for every poacher arrested, there were desperate people waiting to take their place, driven by poverty and lack of opportunity. The experience changed me profoundly. I couldn't go back to being just an amateur photographer, not after what I'd seen. I began working with wildlife conservation groups, using my images to raise awareness about the devastating impact of poaching. I returned to Kruger a year later, this time as part of an anti-poaching education initiative. The park felt different now, still beautiful, still wild, but with an undercurrent of vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. Themba had been promoted to head ranger, his bravery and quick thinking during our ordeal recognized by park management. When we met again, there was a bond between us that went beyond words, forged in those terrifying hours of flight and hiding. As we stood watching the sun set over the savanna, a family of rhinos grazing peacefully in the distance, Themba turned to me with a smile. "You know," he said, "most people come to Africa to shoot animals with their cameras. You managed to shoot down an entire poaching ring." I laughed, but it was a laugh tinged with the weight of all that had happened. My camera hung at my side, a reminder of the power and responsibility that comes with bearing witness. The African bush stretched out before us, beautiful and dangerous, a world of vibrant life and ever-present death. I raised my camera, focusing on the rhinos, marveling at their prehistoric silhouettes against the ruby sky. As I pressed the shutter, the familiar click seemed to echo with new meaning. Each photo was no longer just an image, but a testament, a call to action. a reminder of what's at stake in the fight to preserve the wild places and creatures of our world. The light faded, and darkness crept across the land. But in that moment, watching over the rhinos with a friend who had become a brother, I felt a fierce hope. The night was full of dangers, yes, but the dawn would come, and we would be there to greet it, cameras in hand, ready to capture and protect the wild heart of Africa. The bass was so loud I could feel it in my bones, but it couldn't drown out the voice in my head screaming that something was terribly wrong. I never thought a music festival could turn into a nightmare, but then again, I never thought I'd be fighting for my life amidst a sea of oblivious revelers. It was supposed to be the weekend of a lifetime, the Euphoria Music Festival, 3 days of non-stop music, dancing, and freedom in the California desert. My friends and I had been planning this trip for months, saving up for tickets, coordinating outfits, and dreaming of the memories we'd make. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. The energy was electric, the music pulsing through the air as thousands of people danced under the scorching sun. As night fell, the desert transformed into a wonderland of lights and sound, with art installations glowing in the darkness and stages pumping out beats that seemed to make the very earth vibrate. It was during the headline act of the second night that things started to go wrong. We were right in the middle of the crowd, jumping and singing along with the music, when I realized I couldn't see any of my friends. I wasn't worried at first. We'd gotten separated before and always managed to find each other eventually. But as the set ended and the crowd began to disperse, there was still no sign of them. I made my way to our meeting spot, a giant neon sculpture of a hand reaching towards the sky, but they weren't there either. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I tried calling them, but the cell service was spotty at best, overwhelmed by thousands of people trying to use their phones at once. After what felt like hours of searching, I was exhausted, dehydrated, and starting to panic. That's when I met Sarah. She seemed to appear out of nowhere, a friendly face in a sea of strangers. "You look lost," she said, her voice somehow carrying over the noise of the festival. "Need some help?" I explained my situation, relief washing over me at the prospect of assistance. Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I know a place where we can get a better view," she said. "Maybe we'll spot your friends from there." I followed her without hesitation, grateful for her kindness. We weaved through the crowds, moving away from the main stages and towards the outskirts of the festival grounds. As we walked, Sarah chatted amiably about the bands she'd seen and how much fun she was having. It wasn't until we'd been walking for about 15 minutes that I realized how far we'd gone from the heart of the festival. The music had faded to a distant thump, and the crowds had thinned to almost nothing. Unease crept back into my mind. Sarah?" I said, slowing my pace. "I think we should head back. This doesn't seem like a good place to look for my friends." Sarah turned to me, and the change in her expression made my blood run cold. The friendly smile was gone, replaced by something calculating and cold. "Oh, we're not looking for your friends," she said. "We're meeting mine." Before I could react, 2 men stepped out from behind a nearby structure. They were large and intimidating, with hard eyes that regarded me like a piece of meat. I turned to run, but Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't make this difficult," she hissed. "You're coming with us, one way or another." My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Human trafficking, robbery, whatever it was, I knew I was in serious danger. I opened my mouth to scream, but one of the men clamped his hand over it, muffling my cries. They started dragging me towards a van parked in the shadows. I fought with everything I had, kicking and thrashing, but they were too strong. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I realized how easily I'd fallen into their trap. Just as they were about to shove me into the van, a voice rang out. "Hey, what's going on over there?" It was a security guard, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. My captors hesitated for a split second, and that was all I needed. I bit down hard on the hand covering my mouth, tasting blood. The man yelped and loosened his grip. I wrenched myself free and ran towards the security guard, screaming for help. The guard radioed for backup as Sarah and her accomplices fled into the night. I collapsed to the ground, shaking uncontrollably as the reality of what had almost happened sank in. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police were called, statements were taken, and my friends were finally located. They had been searching for me too, frantic with worry. When they heard what had happened, they were horrified and guilt-ridden for losing track of me. The festival organizers were apologetic and supportive, offering counseling and upgrading our accommodations for the rest of the weekend. But the magic of the event was gone for me. Every face in the crowd now seemed potentially sinister, every friendly stranger a possible threat. We stayed for the final day, mostly because changing our travel plans would have been a logistical nightmare. But I couldn't enjoy it. The music that had lifted my spirits now grated on my nerves. The carefree atmosphere felt false, a thin veneer hiding darker realities. As we drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to disappearing, how easily I'd trusted Sarah, how quickly things had spiraled out of control. The festival that was supposed to be a celebration of life and music had become a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in the world. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with anxiety and paranoia. Crowds made me nervous, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. My friends tried to understand, but they hadn't experienced the bone-deep terror of being powerless in the hands of people who meant them harm. Therapy helped. Slowly, I learned coping mechanisms and worked on rebuilding my sense of safety. But I also learned valuable lessons about situational awareness and trusting my instincts. I didn't swear off music festivals entirely. The thought of letting fear rob me of experiences I loved was almost as scary as what had happened. But I approached them differently now. No more separating from the group, no more trusting strangers, no matter how friendly they seemed. It took time, but eventually, I found a balance between caution and enjoyment. I could appreciate the music and the atmosphere while staying vigilant. I made sure my friends and I had a solid buddy system and check-in procedures. We researched festivals thoroughly, choosing ones with strong security measures and good reputations. The experience changed me, there's no doubt about that. But it also taught me resilience. I learned that I was stronger than I knew, that I could face my fears and come out the other side. A year after the incident, I returned to Euphoria. It was a decision I struggled with, but ultimately I felt it was important for my healing process. Walking through those gates again was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My heart was pounding, and for a moment, I thought I might turn around and leave. But then the music started, and I felt something shift inside me. I looked around at the smiling faces, the elaborate costumes, the art installations glowing in the twilight, and I realized that while there was darkness in the world, there was also light. There was joy and connection, and the transformative power of music. I danced that night, surrounded by my friends, more alive and present than I'd felt in months. The bass thrummed through me, but this time it didn't drown out my thoughts. It amplified them. I was here. I was safe. I was strong. As the headliner took the stage and the crowd erupted in cheers, I felt tears streaming down my face. They weren't tears of fear or sadness, but of release and triumph. I had faced my demons and come out dancing. The festival experience will never be quite the same for me. I'll always be a little more cautious, a little more aware, but I refuse to let fear dictate my life. Instead, I choose to live it fully, to dance harder, to love deeper, and to never take for granted the gift of being present in a moment of pure joy. Because in the end, that's what music festivals are about. Not just the beats and the bands, but the reminder that even in a world that can be dark and dangerous, there are moments of pure magic, and those moments are worth fighting for. The gentle whir of bicycle wheels can lull you into a false sense of security. But on the winding roads of rural France, I learned that sometimes the most picturesque routes can lead straight into a nightmare. I'd always dreamed of cycling through the French countryside. The idea of pedaling past rolling vineyards, quaint villages, and fields of sunflowers had been a fantasy of mine for years. So when I finally saved up enough for the trip, I didn't hesitate. I packed my gear, flew to Paris, and set out on what I thought would be the adventure of a lifetime. The first few days were everything I'd imagined and more. The weather was perfect, warm sunshine with a cool breeze that made cycling a joy. I stayed in small bed and breakfasts, enjoying local cuisine and wine each evening. The people I met were friendly, always ready with a smile and a bonjour as I passed. It was on the fourth day that things took a turn. I had planned a long ride, wanting to reach a particular village famous for its medieval architecture. The route took me further from the more touristy areas, into a region of France that felt untouched by time. As I pedaled along a narrow country road, enjoying the solitude and the beautiful scenery, I noticed a van in my rearview mirror. It was far behind me, but something about it made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way it seemed to be matching my pace, never getting closer but never falling behind either. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, this was probably the only road for miles. It made sense that we'd be traveling in the same direction. But as the hours passed and the van remained a constant presence, my unease grew. I decided to take a detour, turning onto an even smaller road that wound through a dense forest. To my dismay, the van followed. My heart started to race. This couldn't be a coincidence. I picked up my pace, pushing my legs harder, hoping to lose them on the twisting road. But the van kept up, the sound of its engine growing louder as it gained on me. Panic started to set in. I was alone in a foreign country, on a deserted road, being pursued by unknown assailants. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Were they thieves? Kidnappers? Something worse? I spotted a gap in the trees and made a split-second decision. I veered off the road, plunging into the forest. Branches whipped at my face as I struggled to control my bike on the uneven ground. Behind me, I heard the screech of brakes and car doors slamming. "She went into the woods," a man's voice shouted in accented English. "Spread out and find her." Terror gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I pedaled furiously, ignoring the burning in my legs and lungs. The forest was dense, the ground treacherous. More than once I nearly lost control, the bike skidding on loose leaves and exposed roots. I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth behind me, their shouts growing closer. I didn't dare look back, focusing all my energy on moving forward, on escaping. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the forest onto another road. Without hesitation, I turned and started pedaling again, my legs screaming in protest. I had no idea where I was or where this road led, but anywhere was better than back there. As I rode, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Who were these people? What did they want with me? I ran through everything I'd done in the past few days, trying to think if I'd somehow offended someone or witnessed something I shouldn't have. But nothing came to mind. The road began to climb, a steep hill that had me gasping for breath. But fear kept me going. At the top, I allowed myself a quick glance back. My heart sank as I saw the van in the distance, steadily gaining on me. I flew down the other side of the hill, taking the curves at dangerous speeds. The wind whipped past me, bringing tears to my eyes. I was going faster than I ever had on a bike, but it still didn't feel fast enough. As I rounded a bend, I saw something that made my heart leap, a small town in the distance. Civilization, safety. I pushed harder, willing my exhausted body to keep going just a little longer. I barreled into the town square, nearly colliding with a group of startled tourists. Ignoring their shouts of surprise, I spotted a police station and made straight for it. I practically fell off my bike at the station steps, stumbling inside with legs that felt like jelly. The officer at the desk looked up in alarm as I burst in, wild-eyed and gasping for breath. "Help!" I managed to choke out between gulps of air. "Someone, chasing me. The next few hours passed in a blur. I gave my statement to the police, describing the van and the men as best I could. They sent out patrols to search the area, but found no sign of my pursuers. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of what had happened hit me. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The female officer who had taken my statement wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and pressed a cup of sweet tea into my hands. "You're safe now," she said gently in heavily accented English. "We will find these men." But they didn't. Despite an extensive search and investigation, no trace of the van or the men was ever found. The police had theories. Maybe they were part of a human trafficking ring, or thieves targeting tourists, but without more evidence, it was impossible to know for sure. My idyllic cycling trip had turned into a nightmare. I couldn't bring myself to get back on the bike. The very thought of those quiet country roads, once so appealing, now filled me with dread. I cut my trip short, flying home a week early. Back home, I struggled to readjust. The incident had shaken me to my core. I jumped at every sudden noise, flinched whenever a van drove by. Sleep was elusive, plagued by nightmares of endless chases through dark forests. It took time and therapy, but slowly, I began to heal. I learned coping mechanisms for my anxiety and worked on rebuilding my sense of safety. But the experience had changed me in fundamental ways. I couldn't look at a bicycle the same way anymore. The freedom and joy it once represented were tainted by memories of fear and helplessness. It was months before I could bring myself to ride again, and even then, only in busy areas where I felt safe. As time passed, I started to share my story. At first, it was just with close friends and family. But eventually, I found the courage to speak at travel safety workshops. I wanted to warn others about the potential dangers, to encourage them to be cautious without letting fear stop them from exploring the world. It wasn't easy to relive that day, to see the shock and horror on people's faces as I recounted my experience. But it was also cathartic. Each time I told the story, it lost a little bit of its power over me. A year after the incident, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going back to France, not to cycle this time, but to face my fears head-on. I returned to the same region, drove those same roads that had once been the backdrop to my terror. It was harder than I expected. Every van I saw made my heart race. Every stretch of quiet road brought back memories of that desperate flight through the forest. But with each mile I drove, each village I visited without incident, I felt a little stronger. On my last day, I found myself in the town where I'd finally found safety. I stood in the square, looking at the police station that had been my refuge, and for the first time since that day, I felt a sense of peace. I realized then that while the incident had changed me, it hadn't broken me. I was still here, still traveling, still living. The men in the van had taken my sense of security, but they hadn't taken my spirit. As I flew home from that second trip, I felt a shift inside me. The fear was still there, a quiet presence in the back of my mind, but it no longer controlled me. I had faced it, acknowledged it, and moved forward despite it. I may never cycle alone through the French countryside again, but I won't let that one terrifying experience define me or limit my life. Instead, I choose to focus on the beauty I saw, the kindness of the people who helped me, and the strength I found within myself. Because in the end, that's what travel is about. Not just seeing new places, but discovering new parts of ourselves. Sometimes those discoveries come from moments of joy and wonder, and sometimes, as I learned on those winding French roads, they come from facing our deepest fears and emerging stronger on the other side. They say knowledge is power, but sometimes ignorance truly is bliss. I learned that lesson the hard way one night in a skyscraper, when my curiosity led me into a world of cybercrime and danger I never knew existed right under our noses. I've always been a night owl, which is why I didn't mind the late shifts at my IT job in one of the city's tallest skyscrapers. There was something peaceful about working while the rest of the world slept, troubleshooting network issues and keeping the digital heart of the building beating. It was on one of these quiet nights that everything changed. I was tracking down the source of some unusual network activity, the kind of thing that usually turns out to be an employee streaming movies or running a Bitcoin miner on company time. But this was different. The traffic was coming from an unused floor, one that had been closed off for renovations for months. At first, I thought it was just a glitch in the system. Maybe some old equipment had been left on and was sending out automated signals. But as I dug deeper, I realized the activity was too consistent, too deliberate to be a simple malfunction. I debated calling security or the police, but what would I tell them? That I had a hunch something weird was going on based on some network logs. They'd probably laugh it off. No, I needed more information before I raised any alarms. Looking back, I should have left it alone. Should have logged it and let someone else deal with it in the morning. But curiosity has always been my weakness, and that night, it led me into a situation I never could have imagined. I decided to investigate on my own. The elevator needed a special key to access the closed floor, but I knew a service stairwell that would get me there. My heart was pounding as I climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the empty stairwell. When I reached the right floor, I hesitated at the door. This was my last chance to turn back, to forget about the whole thing and go back to my safe, boring night shift. But the mystery of what was on the other side of that door was too tempting. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The floor was dark, lit only by the glow of emergency exit signs. I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight to navigate through the maze of half-demolished cubicles and construction materials. It was eerie, seeing a space that was once full of life and activity now abandoned and in disarray. As I moved deeper into the floor, I started to hear something. A low hum, the unmistakable sound of computer fans working overtime. I followed the noise, my pulse quickening with each step. And then I saw it. In a far corner of the floor, hidden behind some temporary walls, was a setup that made my jaw drop. Rows of high-powered computers, more than I could quickly count, all humming away. This wasn't just some employee's secret mining operation. This was something much bigger. I approached cautiously, my IT brain taking over as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. These weren't ordinary computers. They were custom-built, optimized for processing power, and they were all connected to a central hub, a sleek black box that I didn't recognize. As I leaned in for a closer look, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices and footsteps coming from the stairwell. Panic set in. I looked around frantically for a place to hide, finally ducking behind a stack of drywall just as the door opened. "I'm telling you, someone accessed the network," a man's voice said, tense and angry. "We need to find out who it was and shut them up." "Relax," another voice replied, calm but with an edge of menace. "No one knows we're here. Probably just a glitch in the system." I held my breath as they moved closer to the computer setup. Through a small gap in the drywall, I could see them. Two men, dressed like ordinary IT workers, but with an air of danger about them that made my skin crawl. "Check the logs," the first man said. "See if you can trace the access point." I watched, heart pounding, as they worked at the computers. I knew it was only a matter of time before they traced the activity back to my workstation. I had to get out of there. But as I was planning my escape, I overheard something that made me freeze. "The attack is scheduled for midnight tomorrow," one of them said. "Once we're in their systems, we'll have control of everything. Power grids, traffic lights, emergency services. The city will be ours." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These weren't just hackers or crypto miners. They were cyber terrorists, planning an attack that could paralyze the entire city. I knew I had to do something, but what? I was trapped, outnumbered, and way out of my depth. One wrong move and I'd be discovered, and I had no doubt these men wouldn't hesitate to silence me permanently. For what felt like hours, I remained motionless, barely daring to breathe as the men worked. My legs cramped, my back ached, but fear kept me still. Finally, mercifully, they seemed satisfied that their security hadn't been breached. "Come on," one of them said. "We need to finish the preparations. We'll do one final check in the morning." I waited until I couldn't hear their footsteps anymore before I allowed myself to move. My entire body was shaking as I emerged from my hiding spot. I knew I had to act fast. In a few hours, the morning shift would arrive, and my chance to stop this would be gone. But what could I do? I couldn't go to the police. By the time they took me seriously and got a warrant, it might be too late, and I couldn't confront the hackers directly. I was an IT guy, not a hero. Then it hit me. I might not be able to stop them physically, but I could fight them on my own turf, the network. I rushed back to my workstation, my mind racing. I had to find a way to disrupt their operation without alerting them. It was a digital tightrope walk, and one false move could send everything crashing down. For the next few hours, I worked feverishly, using every trick and hack I knew. I created false trails, rerouted their traffic, and slowly but surely began to undermine their system from within. It was like a chess game where my opponent didn't know we were playing, and every move could be my last. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the office windows, I finally felt like I had made some progress. Their system was in disarray, their attack delayed if not entirely derailed. But I knew it wasn't enough. They would eventually figure out what had happened and find a way around my sabotage. I needed help, but I had to be careful. If I went to the wrong person, it could tip off the hackers. Then I remembered Sarah, a colleague who worked in cybersecurity for the company. If anyone would believe me and know what to do, it would be her. I called her personal number, praying she would pick up. When she answered, groggy and confused, I blurted out everything in a rush. To her credit, she listened without interruption, and I could almost hear her mind shifting into high gear. "Stay where you are," she said finally. "I'm calling in some favors. Whatever you do, don't let anyone know what you've discovered." The next few hours were the most stressful of my life. I continued my digital guerrilla warfare against the hackers while jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment they would discover what I had done and come for me. Just when I thought I couldn't take the tension anymore, the elevator dinged. I braced myself, ready for the worst. But instead of angry hackers, I saw Sarah stepping out, flanked by serious-looking men in suits. "FBI," one of them said, flashing a badge. "We're going to need you to tell us everything." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. The building was quietly evacuated, my closed floor swarmed by agents. I told my story over and over, to increasingly higher-ranking officials. By nightfall, the hackers had been apprehended, caught completely off guard by the raid. In the days that followed, the full scope of what I had stumbled upon came to light. The hacking group had infiltrated not just our building, but others across the city, setting up a network that would have allowed them to cripple the city's infrastructure. My late-night curiosity and quick thinking had prevented a catastrophe. There was talk of commendations, of job offers from shadowy government agencies, but all I could think about was how close we had come to disaster, and how many other threats might be lurking in the dark corners of our digital world. The experience changed me. I couldn't look at a computer network the same way anymore, always wondering what secrets it might be hiding. But it also showed me the power of knowledge, of trusting your instincts, and of fighting back even when the odds seem insurmountable. I still work late nights in that skyscraper. But now, every time I trace an unusual signal or investigate a network anomaly, I do it with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest threats are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to uncover them.